Okay, we should be live. Let me double check. It's not showing up for me. That's great.
I've got it.
Happy Legacy Day.
So, welcome to the Armistice Day Centennial stream, everybody. With me, we've got quite a few people, and we might have at least another person joining when he gets the link. And so today, all ad revenue from this and all the super chats and that are going to be going to a veterans charity, specifically for making homes for homeless veterans. As some of you might know, my last video on veterans history got demonetized by YouTube. I'll be putting out a diatribe on that next week. But today we have a few YouTubers you may know and a few you may not. And I highly encourage everybody to go and subscribe to their channels. So first we have EmperorTigerstar.
Hello.
Tell everybody about your channel.
Maps. Lots and lots of maps.
That is indeed a good description.
That's pretty much it, yeah.
Yeah, I think you're now the biggest map making channel on YouTube now.
I always was.
There was somebody who was I'm forgetting his name, something W, at the end of his name. He was pretty big for a while.
Oh yeah, I think I know who you're talking about. Is it like Edward for the win? Was that who you're thinking of? Oh, I don't know.
And next we have Jack.
Hello. My channel is a bunch of silly animated biographies. Lots of fun.
Then and his full channel name is Jack Rackham. So next is Potential History, or Johnny.
Hello. I shitpost about history and try to make good points when I can. Meme tanks in the chat. But yeah, I just do kind of some series like that.
Next is Stefan Milo.
Yeah, I'm Stefan. I'm more of an archaeologist than these historians. I'm the baby channel here, so thanks for having me on. But if you guys are into the really old stuff, check out my channel, Stefan Milo.
Milo, sorry. Then we have Tim Betts.
Hello, I'm Tim Betts from Mr. Betts class. I'm the one that does all the historical parody songs and like meme story videos, and every now and then I get really serious. But most of the time I just make a fool of myself while teaching history.
Yeah, especially those animated ones that you've done recently. Those were quite serious and really good. Yeah,
I'm working on one right now. It was supposed to be Thursday. Yeah, it's gonna look like 2.5 weeks from Thursday, so but it's gonna be good. Yeah, I did this. I storyboarded it, and I'm like, oh, this will be easy. It'll be like 12 shots, and it's like 50 different shots that I'm gonna have to do from scratch. So that one's going further back on the schedule.
Hooray for animation.
Trying.
Yeah.
So much work. I hate having to do all the editing. So we're here to talk about the armistice, which today at 11 o'clock today in Paris, which was basically yesterday for most of us, the World War I ended. So one of the first things we wanted to talk about was like, how does that affect us today?
We get a paid leave from our job sometimes.
If it comes out on the exact day of the 11th. Like,
yes.
It's one of the few days that they didn't move to like being a Monday or a Friday.
My job moved it to a Monday. I don't know about you guys. I'm not going to work tomorrow. So.
Yeah, that's what they did with mine. But
Yeah.
like I have like a public job, so
Cheaters.
Yeah, I work in a bank.
I'm private school, so I'm going to work tomorrow.
Your private school?
Yeah, doing private school. I've done public and charter. Now I'm doing private. It's the best ever.
I don't have anything on Mondays anyways, so and so I have a 4-day weekend because I have those awesome freaking university hours.
Yeah.
Nice.
Although I still have I have like an 8 o'clock class on Monday. That's only like 50 minutes, and then it's just nothing else.
Wait, 8 o'clock p.m. or a.m.?
AM.
No.
Yeah,
so
I
you
know.
can Wake up early and do nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Can't even sleep in.
I do not wake up in the a.m. Like when I release my videos, that's typically right when I'm waking up.
Yeah, I usually end up doing that too.
But one of the things that's really interesting about this whole veterans thing, well, at least for me, I get a lot of free food. I've been to Olive Garden and Applebee's today.
I just had my Chipotle burrito, and after this, I'll have my get one free burrito.
I didn't know Chipotle had one.
Buy one, get one, BOGO.
Oh, by the way, Tim is also from the Navy. I don't know how long you served.
5 years, 02 to 07.
So we overlapped for a total of 2 years.
There you go.
I was 05 to 2011.
Aw, baby.
Now I'm 30, so I've got the big 3-0.
30's okay. It's when you hit 31, because then you're in your 30s. That's the problem.
Dead silence. Yeah.
Yeah.
None of us want to talk over each other. That's the thing.
Yeah,
We're all too
there's so many
polite.
people, yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask though?
We already got some freaking Navy jokes.
In the Navy.
I was going to say.
At least
anything,
it's not Air Force, right?
Yeah, Chair Force.
Yeah.
Although currently we're all in the Chair Force.
Although you have to admit, the World War II American Air Force uniform is amazing because you're essentially wearing a cool leather jacket and a nice hat.
I've actually got one of those somewhere.
That's true. As long as you're sporting a pencil mustache, that's the complete Air Force look. World War II.
Well, if you're from Britain, then you have to have like the
The mutton chop mustache hybrid.
Yes.
You tell me
only
dungarees
shave your
aren't
chin.
cool?
The double paintbrush.
Yeah, that's a good word for it.
And again, if you look at World War I pilots, a lot of them always shaved, and I think that was actually for practical purposes.
The gas mask thing.
Yeah, because that's where the military has you. Like even today, you're allowed to have a mustache, but only to the ends of your lips. So like, even if I were to shave all of this would still be out of rags. And that's specifically because you can have hair above your lip, but anything to the side will mess with the seal.
Hmm.
So that persists to this day. And one actual legacy of World War I is that like everybody shaves now.
Yep.
Like our last president to have facial hair was Taft. On like no one since. Just sad.
Yep.
Yeah, because there were some amazing presidential beards in there. It's kind of a loss.
Van Buren.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually did a video recently on like the top 10 best beards in history. They were all so beautiful.
I don't remember if I watched that, but
I
I
think
remember you talking about it. 'Cause
Like,
I was like,
funnily
you better
enough,
talk about H.H. Bancroft.
funnily enough, though, the highest American beard was actually the Secretary of the Navy during the Civil War.
Like, is that Seward?
No, and I don't know why I'm forgetting his name. Gideon Wells.
never met the guy.
That's a good beard. Yeah.
It really is, especially like maybe it's just because he just looks so sternly pissed in his photos that he just has that like look of like, I am the reincarnation of Poseidon and I will destroy you with like every portrait he's in. And it's
Got to find a
beautiful.
picture of this guy now.
His name is oops. Already clicked.
Gideon
Wells.
Wells.
Gideon Wells.
Wells.
He has that like I'm about to go after Moby Dick. Kind of.
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
they call-
that is a
they call me
mighty beard.
Ishmael.
That is a Captain Ahab beard, if I've ever seen
Yeah.
one.
Like I imagined a lot of people wanted me to put Lincoln on the list, but it would have felt cliche. And plus, I felt like the list was best beards, not iconic beards. So I ended up picking Gideon Wells.
It's just so
And
big
so
and it's so
as-
white. It's like an absence of space. Like the photographs didn't work.
As
I love how his beard is somehow older than the rest of him.
as Coomrad 1917 points out, Karl Marx had a hell of a beard.
However, weirdest
Engels, though,
beard.
I like Engels better because he like Karl Marx is like, but Engels is like long and like ZZ Top level kind of beard, you know.
The weirdest beard, though, is Peter Cooper. And it should be the first result that comes in because he has like this weird I can't tell if it's like part of his actual hair or if it's like a sideburn beard that just sticks outwards. I can't tell.
This
He had
guy
a-
right here. So, what the heck?
Oh
is
my
that?
goodness.
Yeah. Like in some photos, it looks like he just curled up his hair, but then like in other photos, it just looks like it's just puffing out of his sideburns.
There's just no beard like a 19th century beard.
That's
They
it.
don't make them like they used to.
Oh yeah.
My favorite is still going to. I mean, partly because he's a historian, but H.H. Bancroft. I mean, like, look at that.
That's pretty good.
I'd be much more interested to hear the women of the 19th century and their views on these stunken beards. Like what my wife would think if I just grew my sideburns till they're 2 foot long. I don't know.
Part of it was also like a health thing because there's this idea that if you had like a really thick mustache and beard, it would prevent bad air from entering your lungs. It kind of served as like an exterior barrier.
Bad air and half the contents of your spoon.
Yeah, so that's why like so many like 19th century doctors have like a thick bushy mustache because they want to be healthy.
I know what to say the next time somebody tells me that I should shave my beard.
Wait, you know what? Look up Horace Greeley. Horace Greeley has a horrifying
Horace
beard.
Greeley has like the best mutton chops.
No, not mutton chops. He has a literal neck beard. I don't mean like the modern thing where you forget to shave. I mean
yeah.
like a beard
Ooh.
is literally growing out of his neck.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
Pretty
that I
long,
needed
too.
to be screen sharing. Hold on.
Yeah, like, and he's wearing like the collars over the beard. Like, can you imagine all that chafing like all the time?
Oh,
That would
man.
drive me nuts.
He's
Uh,
a committed man.
Why would
I
you
tell you
ever
what.
want to wear this?
I don't know.
The beard
man-
turtleneck.
It's horrifying. Like, it's legitimately horrifying.
Ow!
If there's a man here who says they didn't have a neck beard in their last few years of high school, you're a liar. I'm telling you that.
But it's
It was
never
all
that
about
big,
neck.
though.
16 to 17. Mine wasn't that big, that's true.
But nobody's had a neck beard like that.
No, it's
Whoa,
almost like the
that's
opposite of a
especially
comb
bad.
over.
Yeah.
Comb
Oh
under.
my gosh.
Comb under.
It
This
almost
guy's
looks like
trying to
it's
tell
grown
people
up
to
and
ride
out of his
west.
shirt.
He's preparing himself for the winter.
He's terrifying them into going west. They're just trying to get away from him.
Yeah, and he's
That's
the
why he's
guy.
always telling young men. He says, "Go west, young men, and grow up with the nation." That's because he doesn't want them around.
Don't suffer the same fate as I.
And to link it back to veterans, he's the guy who ran for the presidency against Grant and then like died before the election was over.
Oh,
Yeah, Greeley had some interesting stuff because he was also he was like it's the name of the guy. President during the 1820s and 30s, really famous. Jackson. Jackson. Him and Jackson went after each other quite a bit. In fact, at one point, Jackson had talked about like he said like, I wish I could have shot Henry Clay and Horace Greeley and hung whoever was his vice president that ended up like going and being governor of South Carolina.
Oh yeah.
Either way, all of that, he actually wanted to go after like Horace Greeley.
What was his
I believe
name?
it.
Greeley was actually opposed initially to the Mexican American War, and then he did a 180 like real quick. But during Polk's whole campaign, he actually kept on flip-flopping with like, I really like this Polk guy, and then no, he's a freaking bastard. And that didn't go well with Jackson.
John C. Calhoun, that was his name. That's another one with a very scary photo. Not beard wise, but just like a face.
Those eyes. Yeah, the freaking like, I'm going to kill the person taking this photo eyes.
He could have given Boris Karloff a run for his money if he played Frankenstein.
I mean,
well,
geez.
We covered the most important legacy of World War I at the start.
Definitely.
The demise of the 19th century beard.
Well, remember, the most important part about history is the background, what led up to the conflict, and so we're being extra precise and careful. Like going as far back as possible.
Are you suggesting that Franz Ferdinand was assassinated due to his perhaps lacking facial hair? I can't picture his facial hair.
Yeah, Gabriella Princip was just trying to keep it alive, and he couldn't stand it.
You see, he was asked by Franz Joseph to grow out some mutton chop beards like he had, and he said, no, I want to change the empire. And then it was just downhill from there.
That's it. He was a reformer, mustaches only.
And then a few years later, the empire was no more.
Yes. They were united under one beard. Each mutton chop representing a part of the empire.
One side Austria, one side Hungary. No one else.
And then the middle mustache part is Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, sitting on the top. All right, I'm going to put this out there. I've been thinking about this. I don't know if this is a controversial statement or not, but the legacy of World War I is more important than the legacy of World War II, in my opinion. I've been thinking about it. I think the case could be made. Does anyone agree? Disagree?
I totally agree. I think of World War II as just kind of cementing what was changing in World War I. In fact, I think I've actually called it on the channel the more bombastic sequel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you see a lot of the groundwork that a lot of things that people attribute to World War II, such as, the Cold War and Europe being split and things like that, especially to do with the Soviet Union. All the real genesis of that was in World War I. It's more dramatic in a way in World War II because it was more active, and then you see the final cementing of it. But the Cold War was really laid out in 1917 with the revolutions.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I keep on having to reinforce with folks is that, like, there's a great book from I don't remember the author's names. It's called The First Cold War, and it's specifically about like the Russian intervention being the beginning of the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
And because if you look at it, there was the cordon sanitaire, which George F. Kennan ended up just doing the same thing, but they called that the policy of containment. So it's just, one's led by the French, one's led by Americans.
Yeah.
And you have trade wars and freaking, embargoes and the U.S. refusing to even recognize the Russians. You have all of that kind of already there, and the Red Scare was way worse in 1919 than it was in the 1950s.
Although the thing that I found really interesting was I was looking over the Wilson's 14 points, and if I recall correctly, there was one in there that was basically along the lines of let Russia do whatever and we'll be cool with it.
Yeah,
which,
that's point number 9.
Yeah.
And he specifically uses the word self-determination twice in it, if I remember correctly. And funny thing is, he said that in something like January 5th, sometime in January of 1918. By April, he was sending troops to Russia. So great job following up on your word, Wilson. Just a wonderful human being.
Well, you make it sound like you don't like Wilson.
No, I mean he
When
was
did
great.
this
He was
happen?
absolutely wonderful.
Can I ask about the intervention in Russia? This is really an area of history I don't know much about at all. I know it happened, but was their objective to shore up the Tsarist regime, the temporary government? What was their objective, and why did it fall apart? I know it happened, and that's about it.
We were
that's a good
anti-Bolshevik, at least.
Oh well, I was going to say more. That's a good question.
Yeah, it was a colossal waste of time.
Yeah.
No matter how you split it. One of the funniest things that I think happened there was when the American troops got there, we were, I believe we were creating, American companies were creating Mosin Nagant rifles to send to Russia. So there were American-made Mosin Nagants stamped with American stampings and everything. But the Bolsheviks stopped
Made by
buying
Remington.
them. Yeah, but the Bolsheviks stopped buying them. And so actually the U.S. government or the army purchased the last of them. So you have U.S. soldiers fighting with Mosin Nagants against Red Army troops also fighting with Mosin Nagants. And it's just a weird irony to me.
Yeah, there was also because they actually for the Archangel deployment, not the Siberian deployment, but the Archangel deployment, everyone was armed with that.
Yeah.
So 100% Mosin Nagant versus Mosin Nagant, but also in Siberia, another armament that the U.S. had been making specifically for Russia were what are called a M95, which is a Winchester, and it's basically just your standard lever action, except for it has a box mag. So you put in clips into the box mag, and it can fire the standard 7.62 by 5.4 or something like that.
Okay.
So like old West style freaking lever actions fighting in Siberia on literally on the Siberian Railroad against Russians, all using the same rounds. And
one of you guys needs to make a video on that if you haven't already. That's
I have actually. My undergrad capstone piece, I think it's called. Yeah, the capstone paper I did on the Russian intervention. So it was it's actually published. So it was it's kind of an important subject to me.
You had a video on it, right?
Yeah.
I think
did
that's
it 3 years ago.
I think that's my extent of knowledge on the subject is just watching that one video.
You'd be surprised how many people have actually tried to say it never even happened.
Really? Why?
It's sad.
It seems like such a small event. You have something like 25,000 Americans there, and a total of another 10,000 Brits / Aussie / whatever British Empire troops, and then another 40,000 Japanese, plus who knows how many Chinese. There's some weird stuff there. All of that makes up the Allies, and it seems like that's a pretty insignificant force to take over Russia, but the Japanese made it past the Urals from Vladivostok.
Yeah.
What?
That's all of Siberia.
Yeah, and
That's
of course,
literally all of Siberia. Plus, there's the Czech Legion, who are kind of doing their own thing, having literal broadside battles where you have two cannons fighting each other on tracks, running down parallel tracks on the freaking Siberian Railroad. That
they just take over the railroad. That's what they do.
Yeah.
And it's awesome. So the Czechoslovakian front lines are just a single railroad from the Urals all the way to Vladivostok. And it's kind of awesome. Because Lenin said you could use the railroad to go home, and then somehow he changed his mind, and they're like, well, screw that, we'll just take over the railroad.
Yeah.
That was actually in Wilson's aide memoir for he actually lists a bunch of reasons for intervening in the Civil War. And the reason that he gives one of the main reasons that he gives is that the Czech Legion needs support. Well, the funny thing is the Czech Legion already, when he writes that, already owns basically all of Siberia, with like what 5,000 dudes or something like that. Like this minuscule force owns more land than pretty much any other empire.
It's just like a bad Hearts of Iron 4 game where Czechoslovakia is just given all of Siberia.
Well, and the other big thing that's interesting from it is how it really colors a lot of the Soviet mentality in the years later. You know, if you're not aware about that, the Soviet Union seems really paranoid and everything, but literally as it was developing, the entire world tried to jump in and stop it. And it kind of makes a lot of their actions later on make a whole lot more sense.
I got a great quote.
Everybody's literally out to get them.
Yeah.
Hold on, I gotta quote Khrushchev now. Let me find the quote.
Oh, do you want me to start banging my shoe on the desk?
Just trying to remember what the name of my paper is. Studying Confucian. Duh. Hold on. I am currently streaming everybody right now, so that's why it's taking me a bit of time to do this.
Oh, you're fine.
Whilst you're doing that, then, whilst we're on the subject of the Czech legions, I was going to talk about this if we talked about World War I literature. But has anyone read the book The Good Soldier Schweik?
No.
You guys are in for a treat. I wish I could read it for the first time again. It's written by a Czech author called Jaroslav Hašek, who served in the Czech Legion. And it's basically an account of the World War I from this Czech soldier in the Austro-Hungarian army and all the inefficiencies of the empire and his circuitous route to war. And it is one of the funniest books I've ever read. If any of you have read Catch-22, you would definitely be into The Good Soldier Schweik. It is my favorite World War I literature for sure. Not that I've read tons of them, but it is well worth a read.
So I found the Khrushchev quote. Khrushchev said this, ironically, in Los Angeles in 1959. He was doing a tour of the United States, and he was talking at a banquet with like the governor of California, the mayor of Los Angeles, typical dignitary crap. And what he said, because they were talking about like how the U.S. always had peaceful intentions, because seriously, most Americans even today have never heard of the Russian intervention.
Right.
And he said, bracket, the Russian people, on bracket, remember that in the hard time after the October Revolution, U.S. troops led by their generals landed on Soviet soil to help the White Guards fight our Soviet system. And they were not the only ones to land. The British, too, landed their forces to fight us. Many European capitalist countries, as well as the United States and Japan, sent their troops into an offensive against the young Soviet state in an effort to strangle our revolution.
History.
You gotta love Khrushchev. He doesn't care what he says. He just says it.
By the way, we have Matt.
Hi, sorry I'm late.
We were wondering about you, man. Freaking. So you obviously haven't been introduced, but you've been on this channel a number of times, so I hope people have already seen you before. So, but let's. Why don't you introduce yourself out in your ways?
Oh yeah, I'm Mr. Beat, and I have a channel called Mr. Beat. You can call me Matt, or you can call me Beatmaster Matt, or you can call me whatever. But I make history videos. Thanks for having me.
Let's call you America, because you're the last one to the party.
Ah, yeah.
I was wondering if I was going to make that joke today as a Brit.
Hey, we came in to save the day, all right?
That's it.
We saved your asses twice.
I'm not going to dignify that with an answer.
So we were talking about the the effects of World War One and like whether or not World War Two was like just a continuation. And to Khrushchev, it seems it was just a continuation, at least in terms of Red Scares and U.S.-Soviet relations. That like that Cold War was just the same as it was in 1919.
I mean, who's the person who said that, like, at the end of World War One, that it wasn't a treaty, it was just a 20-year ceasefire? And he was right. It was a 20-year ceasefire.
I know who you're talking about. I don't remember his name.
But yeah, I'd say World War II is just like the rematch, and especially like if somehow the Central Powers would have won World War I, then World War II would have been the rematch between whatever the extra butthurt France and butthurt Britain would have been.
Oh, so it was Marshal Foch or Foch.
Foch, yeah.
Yeah.
I read him like it wasn't like I'm reading a German name.
Yeah, I think Marshal Foch is an old running back.
Ah, yes, from the Rams back in the San Luis days.
Yeah.
Since you got to bring it up, how much do you think we like to say like we learned all these lessons and whatnot, and the Treaty of Versailles, just oh my God, all the seeds are planted there. How much do you think it's actually us learning the lessons from the Treaty of Versailles when we're ending World War II, and that dictates how we treat countries like Germany or Japan? Or do you think it's more that, or do you think it's now there's a viable opponent right there in Russia and the Soviet Union? Which one do you think really kind of has more to play in that? Are we learning lessons, or are we just getting ready for the next fight? So we're being nice to the people we just fought so they don't go to the other side.
I think the lesson from the Treaty of Versailles was almost be more punitive, because the Treaty of Versailles compared to what happened after World War II, I mean, at Versailles, we didn't say we're going to walk in and we're going to occupy your country for years and split it up. That is arguably much worse than what the Treaty of Versailles did. I think the Treaty of Versailles was a breeding ground for something to happen again. I don't think it's quite A to B that it was going to happen. I think it takes a character like Adolf Hitler or something like that, but it makes it a very good scenario for someone like him to rise up.
A lot of places did get split up after World War One, though.
Austro-Hungary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Austria-Hungary, right. Ottomans, German Empire lost some land. Yeah.
Right.
It was an uncanny valley treaty.
What do you mean by that?
Because like it wasn't like too light to where like there wouldn't be any like resentment to the treaty, but it wasn't harsh enough to where it would stomp out that resistance.
Right. The Allies were very punitive without backing it up with action.
Yes.
Do you think it could have been?
When it comes to the Jutland or Jutland, whatever you want to call it, as in the Rhineland area that France just repeatedly would occupy.
Oh, you mean the Saarland?
Saarland. Ah, dang it.
I was gonna say that's Denmark.
Yeah, the Saarland was kind of like this one territory that they just kind of played back and forth against each other so that like Germany would actually pay back their reparations.
It'd be like if Canada occupied Silicon Valley every single time the Toronto Blue Jays won the World Series.
Would that be twice?
So are we sort of agreeing with Tim then that the difference was recruiting the Soviet Union, or recruiting Germans to help oppose the Soviet Union then? Is that why we haven't had a World War III after the World War?
I think a good chunk of that is that we actually have a functioning United Nations. Like Wilson wasn't. Oh man, I can't say that.
No.
You know what? Wilson didn't get the idea didn't make up the idea anyways. He got that from Kant. Kant is the one who proposed it, and that's a century and a half prior. So
the UN is a priori.
So Kant.
Can't you just give him one?
Nope. But Kant's idea is working. Like it is a key component to why we haven't had another world war. And there's a reason why, like Europe, when like Italy kept on having those big breakdowns in terms of fighting amongst communists and the mob. You didn't have like everybody just jump in, or like what happened in Crete. Like those are or the Suez or freaking Yom Kippur War, or any of those kinds of flashpoints were averted. Whereas the Balkans in like World War One, there was nothing to stop it. It got averted a couple of times with the first couple of Balkan wars, purely because like Russia just kind of backed off and went like, okay, Ottomans, stop that. And Ottomans are kind of like, okay.
The whole Treaty of San Stefano was just a mess. Like Russia gets this treaty where they essentially like get the Balkans to themselves, and then a bunch of British ships were like, nope, we're going to try this again. And then like 2 months later, they signed the Treaty of Berlin.
Is that when the Balkan
You're talking
Wars?
about the
Russo-Turkish War.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because the
Wait, which
Russo-Turkish War of 1877 through 8, basically Russia wipes the floor with the Ottomans, and the treaty almost like jumps ahead of time because it gives Serbia more land, it makes Bulgaria independent, it gives Greece more land, and it essentially gives Russia access through Constantinople. But then like a month later, the British ships like went up to the Black Sea and did their thing of firing some guns and said, no, we're going to do it differently. And so they took back Bulgaria. They took back giving Serbia, Bosnia, and all those other lands, and they gave it to Austria instead. They took back giving land to Greece. And like, so basically it just started it back from square one. And so that's why there was so much resentment in the Balkans for like the first few Balkan wars.
I
Just
feel like
because they
that's-
had it, but then they lost it.
I feel like that's the history of Russia and the Ottoman Empire. Just a series of events like that, of Russia winning and then having to not take quite everything they want and share.
Yes.
Although not in the early years when it was the Kievan Rus fighting the Ottomans. They kept on losing territory. But
Well, that was the Ottoman heyday. They were wiping the floor with everyone.
yeah.
In that period, that was peak Ottoman.
Well, it's like basically as soon as the Ottomans beat the Persians, suddenly they just kind of went like, all right, we're done. and I mean, there's obviously a lot of scholarship that kind of disputes that, but I mean that's the standard narrative, is that the Ottomans kind of turn inward after their win in the Ottoman Persian War.
Yeah, because once they failed to take Vienna, there wasn't really anywhere else they could push through.
Well, they tried to go into Persia. Well, they did.
Oh, yeah, they tried.
They went pretty far, actually. I mean, like the reason why Armenia is split is because of that war.
Yeah.
And like that has there's another effect of World War One, the Armenian diaspora. Like there's so many people who are still like, most Armenians who are in the United States came to the United States in the 19-teens and 20s.
Yeah.
Have you guys talked about nationalism yet?
No.
Have not.
Goodness, like how is this not coming up yet? That's like
Hey, we were
kinda
talking
skirting
about
around
beards, the important thing.
We have been skirting around it though, talking about like the Balkans.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of why the Balkans were pushing for independence, and that was nationalism. They kind of had a national awakening in the late 19th century, leading up to the Balkan Wars.
Yeah, I put this on the notes for the show, but I just the French president Macron at the commemoration or the honoring of the Armistice Day yesterday, well, it wasn't just him. Other world leaders also brought up nationalism, how it's been on the rise again, and so I thought that was an interesting observation, considering that was one of the main reasons why World War I got started, and I think it is something that I am concerned with, a kind of a rise of nationalism, and President Trump's boldly saying, "Yeah, I'm nationalist. Yeah, what's up?" You know, so like, I wanted to get your opinion.
Nationalism, though, is it?
Well, yeah, you mean of the nationalism that was around in the early
caused World War
20th century,
as opposed to current rising nationalism.
Yeah. So, what would you say are the main differences then?
Well, separatist movements are not a key factor in most nationalisms today. You know, when Trump is saying he is a nationalist, he's saying it as he is the leader of the most powerful country on earth. You know, he's not saying it as the leader of the Black Hand.
Plus, there's a difference between ethnic nationalism and like civic nationalism.
I mean, they intertwine quite a bit. But
yeah, but it's basically like an in-group bias, but one focuses on, I guess, where you're from, and then the other focuses on where you happen to live in at the time. Just kind of one of those things that can be retooled to whatever.
Yeah, but
I think
mean,
very
also,
often
like,
it becomes ethnic nationalism, though. Very often, like once you're going down the road, down that road.
Like before World War I, it was just more common to live in an ethno-state or whatever. That was just how it was. So those just used to be more intertwined together. And it's only until relatively modern times where most countries in the West have a variety of people living within them.
You'll find some significant argument against that by historians.
I mean, like to this extent, though.
Yeah, well, for instance, there's a lot of argument. You'll hear a lot about the browning of America currently. You know, as in there's more, you know, whites are going to be a plurality, well, estimated to become a plurality by 2040 or something like that, rather than the majority of the population. But at the same time, when you look at more regional histories like the West, it like the diversity in the West now is Western United States. The diversity in the West now is pales in comparison to what it was 100 years ago.
Really, that's interesting.
And that's one of the interesting things about the West is it's like this weird place that has been mythologized so much that when you start digging into it, it's like, whoa, we don't really understand it that well.
Maybe the better way to put it then is like the perception rather than how it actually is. Because you can certainly agree that at least regardless of what the numbers say, people perceive the modern day to be more diverse than it was 100 years ago.
I think that's fair that they perceive that, yeah. But in terms of, like, if we take it back to the Balkans, I think people used to live in much more culturally mixed groups 100 years ago than they do now, thanks to the collapse of Yugoslavia.
Yeah, and even the Balkan Wars that led up to it. Like, I mean, look at the population exchanges that were happening prior to World War I as a result of treaties, with the Turks literally being deported from always mix up Balkan countries, so I can't remember.
It's from Greece, certainly.
Definitely Greece, yeah.
Because they had the war afterwards.
Grecian independence goes all the way back to 1821. Or 1818, somewhere around there.
1821, I think.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if I'm mixing it up with Mexico. I'm a Western historian. I'm not studying that hemisphere.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's 1821 with Greece and Mexico, I think. I think 1821 is when Mexico had independence.
Yeah. The Greedo happened in 1810, if I'm remembering correctly, for them. So they had a good 11-year independence war, although a good 6 of it really wasn't war at all.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about Mexico because Mexico wasn't really involved in World War One. Besides Germany just kind of courting them.
Zimmerman.
You know, there was so much. Like I did an episode a while back about the causes of World War One, and there were a number of people saying like, "Oh, well, the British were just forging that," and the Germans weren't involved in Mexico at all. And
I heard that too. Was there any evidence for that?
it's straight up like that was an actual telegram sent to Zimmerman. Zimmerman was the
no, the forgery was anything actually?
No, there was no forgery. It wasn't a forgery.
I think the skepticism is because like the Brits had it first and then they told us.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, it's also like it's one of those things where it fits a narrative, and like this is actually kind of the origin. That's another legacy of World War One is the anti-government conspiracy theory movements. Is very much a remnant of World War One. You have folks like what's his name, Smedley Butler, and trying to say that that basically Wilson was conspiring to end World War to bring us into World War One, and it's like, to me, as somebody who's like studied Wilson a lot, I think he was just too stupid to realize what he was doing. That like,
what a surprise!
Like he always had these like high ideals, and then was never willing to live up to them. And
aren't we all? Bloody hell!
Yeah, but to kind of, well, then again, look at our current president.
So relevant commentary.
Back to the Mexico comment. I haven't heard this before. So was Germany trying to entice Mexico into joining the Central Powers in return for Mexico, presumably gaining like California, New Mexico, Texas back?
Except California. It's like the idea was that like they would get all of the Mexican-American war sessions except for the good one, California.
Except for the one that makes all the money.
Yeah.
It depends on how you interpret the telegram, because I mean it's just a telegram, and they said the Mexican cession, which could refer to just what was New Mexico territory. But then again, if it refers to just New Mexico territory, then under the Mexicans, it was actually a very small sliver of land right along the Rio Grande that counted as that, and most of that was California, Alta California, with a little kind of Gastonia that was what would become Arizona, but under the Mexicans, they basically were like, okay, nobody's living there, so it's all California.
There was a horrible alternate history book I read where it's like, what if the Zimmerman telegram actually worked? And it was like Germany somehow manages to actually knock out France and Britain right away in 1914, and they beat Russia, so World War I kind of ends early. But for whatever reason, they do the Zimmerman telegram anyway, and they decide to team up with Mexico to invade the United States, and in exchange, Germany wants to colonize California.
That's a lot of ifs.
Yeah, it was. I found it very badly written and yet very entertaining, just because of how ridiculous it was.
Yeah.
Well, almost all alternate history is pretty.
It was like the Crown Prince was like, "Oh, if I don't conquer California, my dad won't let me be the Kaiser." It was so bad.
Yeah, but even if the Mexicans, even if Mexico had somehow coalesced under one ruler in 1917, which, I mean, to read anything about if you read any historian who's talking about the Mexican Revolution, you know that nobody can get a grasp on like everything that's happening because there's just so much. Like realize when the Zimmerman telegram came in, the United States was still deep into Chihuahua, Sonora, and Coahuila. So like we held 3 states in Mexico when that happened, because we were going after Pancho Villa.
And weren't we still occupying Veracruz too?
No, Veracruz was just 1914.
That's right.
But
Listen,
yeah,
I've
Wilson
never heard that.
liked invading Mexico.
I had a great grandfather who was part of all that chasing Pancho Villa around in that time, and then he got sent to France.
Yeah, I have a distant family relation on that too. His name's Patton.
Yeah.
They were using our invasion of Mexico against us.
Hmm.
Because realize there was already a lot of tension between the U.S. and Germany. Like we had invaded Veracruz basically because of Germany. There's a lot of other things behind that, but like Germany was the catalyst. They sent a ship full of arms to it, and then we were like, nope, we're going to take over the entire state.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question whilst we've got so many American historians here? Obviously, a huge swathe of the American population at that time was of German heritage during World War One. So what was the effect of this German community? Obviously, famously in World War II, fighting Japan, there was the internment of the Japanese. Was there any pushback against the German population? I think I read somewhere.
Yes, there was.
Internment, yeah.
A lot of it manifested in just a lot of people of German heritage started to deny it and back away from it.
Or they would change their last names to more American spellings.
Yeah, so you see these big German communities and stuff before World War One, and they kind of go away with name changes and stuff like that because suddenly the Germans are the enemy, and even though they're German Americans, they're worried about the backlash.
No, we're not Germans. We're Americans.
Yeah,
because they're like the biggest spy effort. Like I still get comments on from this. So it was called the American Protective League. And it was by far the largest spy effort in American history. And I mean, today, the CIA, the NSA, all of that kind of stuff, Project Prism and Keystone and all that, the stuff that Edward Snowden revealed, pales in comparison to the amount of spying that was going on in the United States. It's estimated that the number of people who actually reported to the APL was something like 1 in 5 Americans. It's an insane.
Wow.
Although I love a lot of these things. A lot of these reports are just like, I had a bad day at this restaurant. This guy must be a German.
Jeez.
Like that was real reporting. And
Sounds all right.
It's actually most of it is publicly available, digitized by the Library of Congress. At least what was sent to the Bureau of Investigation. But obviously, the APL was a separate organization and not actually like a government organization. But anyways, the APL really went after anybody of German heritage. To the point that the APL actually organized at least 2 known lynchings of German people. So it was pretty bad to be a German in America for a little bit in there.
Yeah.
Oh boy, I brought up lynching and everybody goes, The dark subject. American violence, it can get pretty nasty.
Reading the chat, do we want to touch on the origin of the starting of World War One, or because that's a question?
Yes.
We were talking about the nationalism, and like we were kind of trying to figure out whether or not the nationalism, what's different about the nationalism that caused World War One versus today's nationalism.
Oh yeah, but like countries responsible and stuff.
Oh yeah. Well, Germany got blamed, didn't it? So that's why.
Well, if you look at the chat history, Austria joined the conversation first.
Yeah.
I'm going to put this out there, Serbia. We did not start World War One. I'm putting
I
that
agree
out
with
there.
that. Yeah.
If millions of Serbs lived in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and if archdukes don't want to get shot, they probably shouldn't be having sprawling empires.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, well, it's more about the interaction between the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Russian Empire. That's
yeah,
really because the World War One is just the third Balkan War. Like, if we were just going by that, like World War One was just the third Balkan War. That's all it is.
Well,
settle it once and for all. Well, although not, but
Austria and Russia couldn't share the Balkans. There could only be one.
Yeah.
yeah.
Hey guys, I gotta cut out real quick. Just want to say, Joe, thank you for your service and thank you for having me on, man.
Thank you for yours.
There we go. All right, I'll see you guys later.
Yeah, it's been good talking
See
to you.
ya.
Yeah.
Mr. Betts' classroom. Be sure to check everybody in this chat's links to their channels are in the description below. So be sure to check them out.
yeah, I was actually gonna bring up Tim because him and I are. Is anyone else a classroom teacher on here? Like teach K-12 at all?
No.
Okay, well, Tim teaches middle schoolers. That's his other gig, and I teach high schoolers about World War One. And when we, of course, simplify it, we have our famous acronym that you guys all were taught probably as well, the MAIN, 4 main causes of World War One. And obviously, it oversimplifies a bit, but it's a good mnemonic device. And of course, you got militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism.
Yep, that's it.
And then the way I always describe about why World War One started is, of course, you have these MAIN as the underlying causes, and then the assassination was just basically the match dropped on the kerosene, or not the gasoline that had been dripping for years. If it wasn't the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, it would have been something else. And I think you guys have been focusing a lot on Serbia, but what about these other parts of what about like what was going on in Africa, for example? I think that has a lot to do with it. This hunger for territory.
Well, the imperialism part of, I'm guessing that's what, I didn't quite hear the whole main thing, and I was never taught that.
You weren't?
No.
Never been to a Midwest high school, clearly.
I say I remember Maine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Remember the Maine?
So nostalgic.
That's wrong war.
Well, that's the right war, but okay.
MAIN, not MA.
So-
Yeah. Anyway,
What's M and A?
M is militarism, A is alliances, I is imperialism, and N is nationalism.
Okay. But the
I mean, how much of Africa wasn't everything apart from Ethiopia already a European colony by World War One?
Ethiopia and Liberia.
And Liberia.
Yeah, everything else.
American colony.
I don't count it because at that point it was like on its own.
It kind of always was, but like, yeah.
It's like we guaranteed its protection, but like it wasn't like a colony in the same sense that like the European ones were.
Yeah. Although I was just reading a book that was just going off the rails about like we shouldn't be trying to say that like America was not an empire. It is, it's the point of that book. Actually, it's an article. Sorry, but really dense historiographic paper. I do not recommend it. I don't even remember. But his main point was that that American historians have a tendency to avoid the word empire, save for that one little instant back in 1898. But otherwise, we have this tendency to act as though like Liberia or later on with the Philippines, or just like dealing with American Indians, was not empire. So they're trying to revive the term settler colonialism, which is essentially saying that America was its own colonizing entity, just like Britain, France, whatever.
Why wouldn't you want to be called an empire? That just sounds cooler.
Well, I think there's probably some aspect of not wanting to be hypocritical there, because we broke off from an empire, and I'm sure that has a lot to do with it. To be like, oh, we're not an empire, because we broke off from the British Empire, and
Well,
so
that's
that
a
would
lot of it,
seem.
But
Yeah.
I mean, like, so was Germany.
Yeah.
There's a lot of empires that are breakoffs of other. The Ottoman.
Like,
Oh yeah,
like
it totally doesn't
colonies are
change what it is,
bad,
but
except for these.
yeah,
Except
it
for
doesn't
ours.
change what it is for sure. But
when it comes to the causes of World War I don't think of imperialism as being a main cause, because yeah, it's a cause of friction, but like it's been a cause of friction for the last 4 centuries.
I would say it was the imperialism that kind of fed into the alliances part, because especially like right before the war in Africa, you had the Moroccan incident where France was going to colonize and divvy up Morocco with Spain, and Germany was kind of hoping to increase its influence in Morocco, and so that would have been over. And so they made a compromise where France and Spain would divide up Morocco, but then they would give Germany more land in modern day Cameroon and Congo and stuff like that. So there were several minor incidents like that to where Germany was starting to poke France more. And so that arguably led to events like the Anglo-French alliance in 1907. So like, okay, Germany's starting to become an actual threat, so maybe we should make an alliance to counter them just in case some colonial war were to appear in Africa in the future.
But that could easily be said to have been the completely opposite. For instance, there's this whole idea because of after 1871, Bismarck basically just solidified alliances at that point and made Europe peaceful, except for that damn powder keg that he kept on complaining about.
I would actually disagree, because there were several alliance changes in between 1871 and 1914. Like for a while, there was the Three Emperors Alliance that lasted like 10 years, and that was Austria, Germany, and Russia.
And
yeah.
Was not Italy actually in alliance with Austria and then switched sides? It was like, actually, I see which way the wind's blowing.
Yeah, they never actually fought for the Central Powers, but they were technically allied with them.
Yeah.
Until they finally just were like, it doesn't look like it's good for you guys. We're going to enter the war and fight our former allies.
And Britain promised them land.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know that.
Treaty of London in 1915, Britain basically bribed them saying, we'll give you half of Austrian Yugoslavia, we'll give you a chunk out of modern day Turkey, and we'll
part of
what's now the coastline of Croatia. I think I saw they were going to cede to Italy.
Yeah,
part of the reason why they ended up turning against him in World War II.
Yeah, that's why that's the stabbed in the back thing that Mussolini was talking about. Where was all this land we were promised? We're Italy. We're important. You promised.
I'm an angry little man.
Yeah. Because like pretty much everything, like it's like, okay, Italy, we never said we would give it to you. We just said we would let you do it. And so Italy had to actually like try to take it for itself, and didn't quite work out in Turkey. It didn't work out in Greece, and it didn't work out in Yugoslavia. And they all three tried in separate wars, and they all failed. And so Mussolini took over because like, wow, this is bull. We didn't get anything. This isn't fair.
Yeah, well, we find that a lot. Well, I just read a book called The Wilsonian Moment that's talking about looking at Wilsonianism outside of direct American influence, specifically Egypt, India, Korea, and China, as kind of them being let down by Wilson is what sparked their new independence movement. Some of them had independence movements prior, but like with Korea, for instance, they actually had like a big uprising and were using Wilsonian rhetoric. But then, like as soon as the American consulate kind of went like, nope, we have nothing to do with this. Because the Japanese were in control of Korea at the time, and they were the Koreans were fighting against the Japanese. I think it's called the May 4th movement, if I remember correctly. Or
Sounds familiar.
I might be mixing it up with China though. Both happened in 1919 though. And it was our kind of like capitulation in not acknowledging the Korean independence movement is what allowed it to get crushed. And it's also where like certain Koreans started looking towards communism, and you know, a particularly important one did.
I think you know, you could say that for a lot of the aftermath of World War I, that it was really the beginning of the end for these European colonial empires, even though it took them several decades to collapse. I mean, after World War I think it was really, the writing was on the wall. And I think I heard about the British in Palestine, as it was, and you know, the British diplomats and civil servants couldn't go anywhere without an armed guard because of just the resistance to British rule in that area. And you know, likewise with India.
Egypt.
Yeah. And it really, the British Empire was not going to live long after World War I, that's for sure. But back to Mr. Beats' main thing. In Britain, at least we're taught it in school, the militarism aspect is huge. And at least how we're taught it, one of the most significant causes of the war from the British perspective was the naval arms race between Britain and the German Empire. We're just churning out these ships, and both sides were really spoiling for a fight. We were super scared that Germany would take our place as the dominant naval power, and we'd have probably taken any opportunity to fight them. That's how
Why are
it's
they trying
presented
to
in
be the
Britain
boat
anyway.
people? We're the boat people. They can't be the boat people.
America's the Navy now, but
My problem with a lot of that, you know, like the imperialism, the militarism parts where it's talking about like these empires competing against each other, is that it makes the cause of the war over-determined. That it basically becomes inevitable. And that's not a very good way of seeing history, right? Of seeing history as something that is inevitable, that there's just this progression that we are all marching along on, that we're all automatons.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot really abide by that. Because if you look at there's a reason why I was pushing the you know, Third Balkan War, because if you divorce it from those local contingencies, then you start talking about these big empires and why they were spoiling for a fight. But they were always spoiling for a fight. Sure, they had been developing in a lot of ways alongside each other in a particular way, ready to fight each other. But so was the U.S. and the Soviet Union, and that didn't turn into a fight.
Well, that was before nukes, though. So, I mean, like, I think the technology aspect of this is something we shouldn't
turned into a fight in 1928 when we had a big issue with a big diplomatic issue with the Soviet Union as well. We were still refusing to even recognize them. And
yeah, but what I mean is before World War I, we really couldn't see what the weapons that they had created, how much damage they truly could do. Whereas, you know, who could have fathomed in early 1914, before this all went down, how much death and destruction there truly would be? I mean, no one could have imagined how bad it would have gotten. I mean, just the first few months of the war, just tens of thousands of soldiers, and it really did turn people's perceptions of war upside down. Before you see this old footage of soldiers marching into the war, like, yeah, we're gonna go kick some butt, yeah, for glory, for country, yada yada.
And then they end up doing the same thing two decades later.
Well, but you see
And-
you see the effect of that in what the British and French do to try to avoid war with Hitler. You know, they
Yeah.
give Hitler basically everything he wants because they remember World War I, and they're trying to avoid that with a fury. And I mean, I know Chamberlain's easy to make fun of with the umbrella and everything like that, but once you put it into that context of they remember World War I, they knew exactly what it was. You know, the whole appeasement thing that gets a bad name now, if you put it thinking about that, then it makes a whole lot more sense because they just saw that happen 20 years ago and they're trying to avoid that no matter what.
And see, I think that's like the more important part of the imperialism, not just the empire, but just the imperialistic glory of war. Like, yeah, you would have bits and spurts of people still promoting war and saying war is good, yada, yada, yada. But in terms of like this universal European idea of it's an honor, a prestige, a glorified idea for a boy to go off to the war type thing, that I feel like even though it would come back in World War II with like the Nazis and stuff, in terms of like levels of popularity, it would never be as high as it was like right when World War I started in 1914.
Right. There's kind of almost kind of a loss of innocence there where
Yeah.
eyes are opened.
Because
Definitely.
talking about the threat of war and like whether it's inevitable with countries butting heads and all that, I find it interesting that you Matt brought up nukes and all that, because while of course it's not to the scale of complete nuclear annihilation, as I recall, wasn't there something about leading up to World War II, a bunch of people assuming that there couldn't be another great big war because of aircraft, and like people worrying about that, oh, you just, go over, bomb the capital city, it would all be over in a matter of minutes or something like that.
Yeah, there was a certain amount of military deterrence. I don't know how much specifically, but if you look at the great leaps forward taken in aircraft, tanks, mechanized infantry, things like that, there's kind of this look at it and being like, wow, this is going to be way worse, now, because look at all the stuff everybody has access to create. And I think you see a lot of the being aware of that in what the Allies limited the Germans to have, because they said, you can't have tanks, you can't have planes, you can't have all these big scary things that are just getting better and better, because that's the super weapon.
And when we finally do get nukes, it does. I mean, I don't deny that that nukes play a significant role in stopping certain conflicts, but at the same time, they can easily start a conflict. And there's been a number of times that we've come damn near close to annihilating ourselves.
Oh yeah,
True. Yeah.
And often over really stupid reasons. I think, I did an episode on.
there we go.
I did it with Plainly Difficult, actually, and we showed that like there's been so many incidents they're hard to even count, and it just takes one going off, and like in the wrong place. Like there is literally a bomb in the Puget Sound, just sitting there, permanently.
Remind me to move out of the Northwest.
Well, if you ended up going to Charleston, not Charleston, whatever the capital of South Carolina is.
Columbia.
Columbia.
I must somewhere in South Carolina that is on a river. There is also a bomb in that one too, a nuclear bomb.
Lovely.
There are a total of 3 nuclear bombs ready in that have just been left because it was not nobody. Well, in the case of Puget Sound, nobody could find it. The southern one, that one's both. There are 2 bombs in South Carolina. One in a river and one in a dirt field that they couldn't find the core of when it got dropped.
Wasn't that mentioned in that book, Command and Control? Is that where it sounds familiar? Like, have you guys ever read that, Command and Control? It talks about it. It really freaks you out as far as like how fragile, like the security of nuclear weapons is.
Yeah, that's why I kind of chafe at the idea that like nuclear bombs have stopped World War III. It's like they very easily could have caused it.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean,
definitely. But it gets down to if someone was going to push the button and do the first strike, and for all the close scenarios we've had, no one's had the guts to do that yet. And
Well,
compared to the Cold War
that's
now,
not
tensions
true.
are lower.
There has been somebody who's pressed the button.
Who is that?
That was a submarine commander during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh, but somebody stopped him though. The 11th
Yeah.
hour, they stopped him. So that's why we're all still alive. So
Yeah, well, they had the same kind of thing that we do, where it's multiple keys. They had like key cards or something like that, and the Politburo chief was the one who was supposed to press the button, because in Russian military stuff they always have like they always had like a political supervisor, basically like our officers, except for they have officers as well. So
yeah, his name was Vasily Arkhipov. Vasily Arkhipov.
that sounds like the guy from the '80s who chose not to press the button when it turned out to be like a flash.
Yeah, it was a false order. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
We've
that's
been
actually
lucky
somebody
with-
refusing.
Or,
I'm,
no, maybe,
I'm talking about the Politburo guy straight up pressed the button, and it was the captain of the submarine who pulled his freaking card right at the last second.
Oh, that's yeah.
So the button was pressed. That's how close we came to blowing each other up in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Just some guy pulling out their freaking card key at the right time.
Right, but there was still someone there who was saying no. Like,
Well, it's actually possible that he might have taken it out because he slipped.
oh,
Fire the nukes. Whoa!
I'm getting really anxious here.
There are diverging accounts, and the captain obviously says, like, no, I meant to.
yeah.
Is anyone else a little freaked out other than me? This is okay.
Definitely, yeah.
We made it 100 years though since World War I. I'm sorry. When was the first nuclear weapon tested? So 1940.
45.
45. Yeah. So
mid 45.
it is amazing how we've made it this far. That's a good question to ask you guys. What do you think about the merits of, like, remember the 80s when they were talking about getting rid of all the nukes? Like, remember the SALT treaties and saying what even Ronald Reagan was like, we need to destroy all nuclear weapons. Is there any merit to doing that?
I remember it so well when I wasn't born.
I think a lot of that's rhetoric, because you're not supposed to have chemical weapons right now, but I can guarantee you everybody's holding chemical weapons somewhere just in case. I think everybody, even with those sentiments, is still going to keep enough in their back pocket to have something to pull out later. I think a lot of major powers would see that as too big of a risk. They would de-arm to a certain point, but I'm sure it has its limit.
Yeah,
How much
of
does
course
it guarantee your safety, though? I mean, have we really averted war just because we have these nuclear weapons? I mean, the vast majority of the vast majority of countries don't have them. I mean, how much of a role does it play?
Yeah, but
think...
the theory is that that there are countries who protect other countries. So, like, the reason why Ukraine and South Africa were able to disarm was because they had South Africa had Britain protecting them and us, and Ukraine had the Russians. So they have no need for nuclear weapons because they've got friends who have nuclear weapons.
Yes. Ukraine signed the treaty that says, oh, hey, Russia, if you leave us alone forever, we'll give you the nukes back. Oops.
I mean, I find it hard to believe that we'd nuke someone to protect South Africa as NATO or the West. I find that hard to believe. I don't think it would happen.
Oh yeah, there's definitely limits to all that stuff, I'm sure. But the thing is, you don't see conflicts between major powers anymore. And if there are conflicts between major powers, you see them in proxy wars and things like that are a lot smaller.
Can we credit the United Nations for that, or are there other factors that are really guaranteeing that? What do you think?
Ooh, I don't know.
I
That
think
could be like a
the-
chicken and the egg thing.
Yeah, I think the United Nations has a lot to do with it, but yeah, you can't give them sole credit.
Right.
You know, it's like chicken and egg. It's like, well, the reason why the United Nations works at that level is because everybody's willing to work together. But the reason why everybody's willing to work together is that they came together to create the United Nations. But the United Nations was creative, you know.
Well, you could also go in the direction of does the United Nations exist to police the world to stop nuclear powers going at it, or do the nukes existing make it necessary for them to do so, or so? It's
Well, the
Yes.
going on.
the key aspect in terms of preventing nuclear war hasn't been, presidents and general secretaries staring each other across the ocean. Instead, it's been the Security Council being able with their veto power, and that was created before anyone else had nuclear weapons. Like, the U.S. was the sole nuclear power when that was created.
Right.
Actually, no, wasn't it
Veto power?
technically created before the nukes went off?
I thought the UN was post World War II, and so
Yeah.
then,
No, like the United States, I believe you're right, Joe. At the time of the United States founding, the United States was the only country in the world with nuclear weapons, at least known.
yeah, because I believe the Soviets got it in 47,
49.
49.
49?
Okay.
Huh.
Yeah, because
Right.
they
Or at least
when
that's when they
China-
had a public testing. That was in 60?
No, right when China's civil war ended, it's 49.
That was 49. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. The
Crazy
Soviets
year.
tested their first nuke on August 29th of 1949.
But so to bring this back to the context of Armistice Day, how is the UN and nukes and trying to prevent World War III different from the League of Nations and the Treaty of Versailles and trying to prevent World War II?
I think the modern day UN and post World War II, along with the occupations of countries and things, just did a lot more of what it preached. And the League of Nations was bringing, like I said before, bringing punitive action on Germany, and just saying, hey, you're a democracy now, you better stay that way, and then not really keeping an eye on them. Whereas in World War II, they say, you're a democracy now, and we're going to keep troops here to make sure it stays that way so we don't do this a third time.
Well, and also Japan. The League of Nations kind of Japan felt like they were screwed over as well, right?
Yeah.
Which
Well,
is
especially
hilarious.
with the ship limitation treaties and stuff post. Oh wait, no,
That's
that
the
pre-World
naval
War I or
conference of 28 or
Yeah.
31.
Yeah, they weren't happy about that either, and that was kind of one of the final straws for them.
Yeah, but they did
Now-
feel left out from because they weren't part because the way the Treaty of Versailles, the Paris Peace Conference was set up was that there was the full-on plenary session that had like everyone all neatly arranged by how powerful you are, with Wilson right there at the head, and then you have like everyone else, but then there was a higher council that will be like, I think it's called the Executive Council, and that Executive Council was really what was making the decisions, and Japan was excluded from it. By the way, we
mean,
have a super chat. It
I just
says,
saw that. Yeah.
I hope the men and women of World War II will be one of the last that had to endure the destruction and grief that war like that creates. Never forget, from Carson Prince. And by the way,
Here.
these for
Yeah,
those
yeah,
who
well
might have
said.
by the way, for those who might have joined in later, all proceeds from this is going to veterans assistance, specifically homes for veterans or something along those lines. It's linked in the description. The Homes for Veterans thing is the where all the proceeds from this will be donated.
Can
All
I
right.
ask you a
Time to be a dork and break out my helmet.
Can I ask a question? I don't know a lot about the League of Nations and how effective or ineffective it was. Presumably very, as there was World War II. But
saying it was effective at all is a joke.
but how much of it do you think plays a part on the fact that when the League of Nations was created, there were still major colonial powers? Like, how was the structure of the League of Nations? Was India involved at all, places like that? Or was it just the British Empire?
Actually, the British Empire gave itself essentially 5 seats because it gave itself a seat, British Canada a seat, British India a seat, British Egypt a seat, and like Australia and New Zealand too.
Well, that's
since
fair.
They were still Unions.
Sounds
like, no, it's not the
Fancy.
British Empire. It's the Indian Empire. They just happen to have the same person with the crown. That's all.
I believe it was the Commonwealth by that point, not an empire. That's not what we called it. But you know what I mean?
Until
You know?
1938.
Oh, really? Okay. But do you know what I mean? Do you think the UN is effective now because it's not just these 5 major powers in there? Lots of countries feel like they have a say. How much of that do you lack of effectiveness of the League of Nations? If you see what I'm getting at.
I think. Oh,
oh, there it is.
You got out the helmet.
The helmet's real.
Face reveal.
Very nice.
But yeah, to answer your question, Stefan, like I think the other part of the MAIN was alliances that we haven't talked about yet, and I think that is you should never discount how like obligations that countries have, and sure, we have things today that are troublesome, like the obligations of NATO, like how that could potentially lead to another world war. But I think the fact that the United Nations, it was pretty much okay. We're getting everybody on the same team, and everybody's going to have a voice, even if that voice is token. It's like every country is going to have a say. Like I think, how many countries are not part of the United Nations? Not
3.
very many. Is it 3? Yeah. So there you go. I mean, I think that's a League of Nations that they could have only dreamed for that kind of. Plus, You're right. You made a good point. This is before a lot of the old colonial the empires.
I have to point out,
declined.
India was still under the British Empire when after World War II. Doesn't matter whether or not it was a Commonwealth. It was
for a little while. Yeah.
Yeah, for 2 years, but
Yeah, they were. I think. I don't know. I know independence was in 48, I think, but I think it had been
47.
winding down.
The vote was 47, but I think the partition was 48. But like the Suez Crisis is in the 50s. It's like 56, and that's often considered to be like the death of empires. Although I know quite a few historians who want to argue that we have never left. In fact, probably the most influential work on empires, something Turner and Bank or something like that. Hold on a second, I can find it easy. A giant frickin' book on empires. Okay, well I thought I could find it easy. I guess I was wrong. Oh wait. Oh, here it is.
Even if empire has died, though, it's not died. Sorry, it's definitely not as overt as it was in the 20s and 30s, and
it's
the
evolved.
19th century. Yeah.
So this is probably the if you want to learn about like current thought on empires and how they work, this is probably the best book out there right now. It's Empires in World History, Power and the Politics of Difference, by Jane Burbank and Frederick Cooper. And it has multiple chapters for after World War II. It talks about the end of empire ? is chapter 13, and 14 is Empire, States, and Political Imagination, and that's actually specifically talking about how the U.S. and the Soviets, that the USSR, spoke of each other as empires. And so, like, it's basically positing that nations did not replace empires. Nations are empires. So like the idea of the death of an empire is fiercely disputed by many historians. So even they're trying to say that that's the reason why the UN works is like not quite dealing with the current historiography. My theory in terms of the reason why the UN worked so well is the Security Council, that you have the biggest, baddest freaking powers have a veto power, as opposed to the League of Nations was made more equal. And that was a pretty bad idea.
Yeah, so kind of like an upper house and a lower house in Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives, right? But hasn't those veto powers by the big dogs in the UN, hasn't that been something that has weakened their power, like made it so they couldn't interact to stop world conflicts when they could have?
Well, I would argue that that's exactly why they're able to function, is that dysfunctionality. Like, look at what's happening in Syria. Well, it's basically over with, but what was happening in Syria, where the U.S. really wanted to intervene, tried to bring it up into the UN, bring up sanctions, and basically make the world against that Syria. But Russia, who also has veto power, vetoed. Well, threatened to veto, and so it never actually went to a session. But yeah, that kind of dysfunctionality is built into the system. I mean, a lot of good government systems are built on dysfunctionality.
Yeah.
And just look at the United States.
You poured yourself another drink? I like it.
So I have something that I'm wondering about. So I've noticed that like every time Wilson's come up, there's been little jabs at him. As someone who sort of looks at the 20th century from afar and warily and kind of avoids it, I'm interested in hearing all your thoughts on him, because he seems like an interesting guy to me. Like jumping into the war late and then having an immense say in the future of Europe.
He was the foreshadowment of post-war United States.
I view him as most of you know, I view him as the worst president in the United States history. He basically defined U.S. interventionism. There was a distinct split in international politics, even to this day. If you take political science, poli-sci, you will be taught that there's the split between Wilsonianism and realism, and most politicians are Wilsonians. Basically, they're idealists when it comes to we want to promote democracy, whereas that's not how politics were handled before. It's not about like whether or not this government is good and this government is bad. It was just about, this is a government and we have to deal with that government.
They're going to love our democracy. It's one size fits all. Why would they not love it?
By the way, we have a couple of super chats. One from Carson Prince, hoping to give money for charity, and it will go to charity. So at least 70% of it, since YouTube takes 30%. And then we have Jaeger Bomb. Here. I'm not going to drink a Jaeger Bomb. But do you all think those who study history are doomed to watch others repeat it? At least we haven't seen World War III yet. Is World War III an if or a when?
For how long we've gone without it, I would say it's more of an if, as of now. And we're talking about 20 years between the first two, and so currently the span and the political climate and everything it points towards no. But I mean, you never know when some kind of disaster could spark something and things could get out of hand suddenly. But like we were talking about with the UN, a lot of things have been put into place to make sure to do everything possible to not have that happen.
I think as well, to add to that, not to keep harping on about empires and stuff, World War One and World War Two were world wars mainly because Europe dragged them into it. I mean, how many African countries would have taken part? Would India have taken part without a European power bringing them into it? So perhaps that element is more avoided now. Like, it would be hard to trigger so many nations into a war, perhaps.
Well, I can give two very good reasons for it, and perhaps one that's currently going on. Two that used to be standing right next to each other, and then crumbled. The
Go
Twin
ahead.
Towers.
Oh, okay.
I was racking my brain.
I'm talking about the Twin Towers.
See, at first I thought you were trying to say the Koreas, but then you said then they crumbled. Oh, well.
Yeah, as in planes hit them and they toppled. The global war on terror is called the Global War on Terror, and it's fought all over the place with any number of nations. Anywhere from Mali to Indonesia to, we've had troops in frickin' like Central America for specific terror stuff, and that's just Americans. We've roped in basically everybody we could. So you could say that the global war on terror is in fact a world war.
Hmm.
Yeah,
There's
but I would say
also
that's more
Operation
first
Face
world
Shield.
versus third world.
One at a time now.
Yeah.
Says the teacher.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Derek.
Oh,
Emperor?
like Operation Sea Shield, like against like piracy too.
Oh,
Yeah, well, I mean, like
Are these-
you would think that it's just. You have a point that it's like first world versus third world. And sure, you could say that, but then that's still worlds versus worlds, isn't it?
and
Yeah,
how many?
but-
Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I guess. But then you're talking about defining how big a war needs to be to get into a war. I don't know. I don't think that. I think the level of violence on that will get capped at a certain point that wouldn't be close to what the general consensus of what a world war would be. But yeah, you are right. It is a massive amount of. It is a lot of fighting across a very large area.
But how many people aren't even aware of that? Like, I ask my students, they don't know we're at war right now. It's not on the news every night. Like, they can't.
Right.
Like, it's like putting out little fires all over the place. It's kind of like, but it's so far removed from society that I think that to kind of classify it as a world war seems a little odd to me.
It's the lesson we learned from Vietnam.
By the way, Johnny, we have a super chat, I think, just for you. They want us
Talk about
they
the
want
Bob
you-
Simple tank sometime in the stream.
So keep that in mind.
Yeah, sure.
Bob
Whenever you guys are ready, let me know.
I do want to talk about the Plan 1919 tanks, because there was a lot of weird ones.
Oh yeah, it just got bigger and heavier in true World War I fashion.
And it was like they had the Mark 7 or something like that, where it's like, here's a Mark 5, here's a Mark 7.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because you see each country kind of continue down its own design path. The British were just going to keep moving up in their rhomboidal tank designs, and I think there was like an armored personnel carrier that was going to debut in 1919, and then just bigger rhombus tanks. The French were going to debut the Char 2C, which was this. It basically looks like this gigantic FT-17 with this big 75mm gun, but the layout and everything looks very similar. It had a crew of like 17 or something ridiculous.
Jeez.
And then the Germans were working on, I completely forget what it's called, so if anybody in chat could remind me. But the Germans were working on this gigantic tank that was supposed to be kind of the counter to the bigger Allied ones. And they started building them, but I think they only were working on 2, and I'm not sure how effective they would have been. Because, I mean, you make a bigger tank that's harder to kill, it also becomes a bigger target, so there's more stuff shooting at it. So I'm not sure how effective any of the designs would have been.
Yeah, well, we find in World War II that a lot of them weren't.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some of you may already know I was a tanker myself. So, and Johnny and I have actually talked a while about this.
Yeah.
The weird thing with the differences in design, I don't know about at the end of World War I, but at the end of World War II is that there is like a distinct philosophical difference between American and Russian designs, and they kind of go off in their own different directions based on that core idea of like Russians will just have something for everything, and Americans are like, we'll have one thing to do everything.
Yeah, it boils down to the Western idea of just defense and a semi-static defense, and the Soviet idea of offense is the best defense. So in their rundowns of if they were to invade Western Europe, they always saw themselves as attacking first. And even if they were attacking, they planned only back up as far as they could before they could attack again, just because that was their ideology, and it's reflected in their vehicles.
Yeah. What were we talking about before we got off on tanks? Because I feel like we can go in a rabbit hole on this one and then kind of like lose everybody else.
Yeah, sorry guys.
I can't remember now.
Back to World War III, though, I think that it's probably going to evolve, and instead of a conventional war, I think the next World War is going to be cyber warfare. Because you won't even need to send troops anymore. You'll just be able to hack a country's infrastructure and bring down their online economy or their online security systems. No, I haven't. It's just something I've been thinking about.
That's been the plot of the new season of the ship.
Yeah. But I mean, like, for lack of better terms, there could be like a digital Pearl Harbor type thing to where we do something stupid where we have.
That's the first episode.
Really?
Yeah.
Maybe I need to watch the show then.
They're like on season 3 or 4, so you'd have a bit of catching up to do. But just straight up, that's the first episode.
Like, we will inevitably be stupid and one country will do something to where somehow its security apparatus or like the majority of its economy is based digitally, and there will be somehow one way to disrupt that, or even something like cut off the power. Like, imagine if electricity was cut off for 24 hours in the United States. Like, that alone would just be tremendously chaotic in that 24 hours. And that could be a form of World War III by doing attacks like that, because you don't have to waste people's lives. It doesn't cost a lot of money, at least for the person who's doing the attack. And it's a lot harder to find out who did it.
Well, at the same time, like, just causing, chaos is not really a good way to wage a war. You got to have some sort of purpose behind it. Like, if you're attacking infrastructure like that and you're trying to cause chaos and like maybe block out communications, and that could get a Red Dawn situation out of that. That's there are a number of things that can be done like that, but at the same time, I have to wonder how much of that really matters when like encryption is just so much further than decryption.
But also globalization, right? Because the economic motives wouldn't be there if we're all so connected with economies. If we're going to shut down the electricity of one country, unless it's a tiny country that doesn't have an effect economically, like I would not imagine China trying to do that to the United States when we buy all their stuff. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
China hacks the Dow and changes the number to 0.
Like that Rick and Morty episode where they change the currency value from 1 to 0 and the whole country explodes.
That show's so good.
Yeah. No, I think you're right there. I think the interconnected economies would prevent that, unless we're talking about some rogue country.
Yeah,
But
like a
even
terrorist
then-
situation.
But even then, how much, you would have to have a lot of technological capability, I think, to pull off an attack of that scale.
What if,
know.
like, say, Russia and China were to increasingly try to expand, and they allied with each other, basically divvying up Asia?
Cold War 2.0.
It'd be great game 2.0 at that point, and like Europe wouldn't have anything to do with it. So Europe would try to have something to do with it.
Yeah.
And that would lead to some serious, I mean, obviously the actual invasions would be pretty freaking bad as one thing. But as we saw with World War II, you start invading places that Europe doesn't like you invading, and that turns into a world war. That's something I could foresee as another kind of conventional war, but I never tried to say like, oh, this can't happen. Because, like I try to keep the predictive stuff, out of like anything other than just like silly fiction, because to me, trying to predict the future is fraught with error.
Yeah, there was a book I read by Milton Friedman. He's like a guy who's a part of Stratfor. Yeah. In 2008, he wrote a book called The Next 100 Years. And when I saw it in the library, no, not Milton Friedman. I'm sorry, not the economic guy. He's dead.
I was going to say
George Friedman, some guy at Stratfor, but he wrote this book in 2008 called The Next 100 Years, where he just tried to predict what the world would be like in the next 100 years. And I found it like a year ago. So I thought, okay, how accurate is he for like the 10 years since this book has been written? I will give him credit. He predicted Russia would invade Georgia and Ukraine. He predicted ISIS, kind of.
Wait, he predicted that Russia would invade Georgia in 2008? Like he wrote that in 2008? Because that happened in 2008.
It was a few months before. But basically he said that like Russia was going to start like poking other countries to try to expand again. And he gave the examples of Georgia and likely next Ukraine. Well, I mean, there's that. He predicted ISIS, at least in the form of like an extremist caliphate. He didn't say ISIS specifically. And then he thought that there'd be a Cold War 2.0 with Russia and that China would somehow be a paper tiger. But then the weirdest part was what he predicted World War III. World War III, the powers that the United States was going to have to deal with in World War III was Japan, Poland, and Turkey.
What?
How do you come to that?
Okay.
He said that, like, apparently during the Cold War 2.0, we would prop up Turkey and Poland as counters to Russia, and then as China declines, Japan would eclipse them and become the dominant trade in the region again. Then when Russia collapses, those nations don't need the U.S. anymore, and so now they're going to try to exert their own thing. It's silly. Like, it's a book trying to predict the next 100 years. But
Yeah.
it was very entertaining.
I went to a talk. I'm trying to remember the guy's name. This was an anniversary thing. It was like there were 17 talks for 17 on all in October, and they were talking about, and one of them was this like big foreign policy guy for the British, FRS, FRB, blah blah blah, all the letters after his name kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
And his talk was about Russian cyber attacks and how that shows that they're trying to assert a new empire through cyber. And there was points in it where I was just going like, you're kind of getting out there, but the guy's really well acclaimed. I mean, he's literally got like all those letters. But he also he also had a very clear point in saying that you cannot predict where Russia is going. That's the point of what they're doing. If you try to predict it, they're purposefully doing the unpredictable.
Because at one point they were creating like a Eurasian Union that was supposed to counter the European Union, and it was pretty much the EU, but with the coincidentally the former Soviet states other than the Baltics, but that hasn't really gone anywhere since the Ukraine thing.
Yeah, Warsaw Pact 2.0.
Yeah.
Well, and I see where people's predictions are coming from, because the Soviet Union and now Russia has always kind of had this mentality that smaller states are kind of the playthings of bigger states, and that if a state isn't aligned with you, it's going to be used to work against you. And I mean, you see that before and after World War II, really, with Stalin grabbing up as much as he could of Finland, the Baltics, and then afterwards just grabbing everything for a buffer state, because they're really afraid of those countries next to them, that as soon as there's a U.S. base there or somebody else's base there, you know, where does that go?
Well, you also see it directly after World War One, literally in 1918 and 1919, where like the Finns are actually being negotiated with by like Churchill discreetly conspiring to have Finland invade Russia and you know hit Moscow, and there was a bunch of kind of secret dealings that way. But then there was also a bunch of like revolutions, you know, throughout Eastern Europe and Germany itself included, because you had the Spartacan revolution and or rebellion, whatever you want to call it, failed. So must be a rebellion. But in either case, this is not like you know, a small you know, kind of outlying batch of stuff. These are things that the Soviet Union is specifically you know, creating the what's it called, the Comintern, just in time for all of this to go off. They have discrete links to these revolutions. We have discrete links to trying to create the cordon sanitaire around Russia. So what's the difference between 1919 and 1946?
No, yeah, I'd say they're definitely similar. Yeah. Which, I mean, it's, when you're looking at it from the Russians' point of view or the Soviets' point of view, you can't really blame them for it, because, you know, with the Allied intervention and everything like that, it's very clear that people are coming after him. I mean, the Germans just came after him. Well, I guess they had a hand in starting that, but the Germans just tore through their country. The Allies are trying to tear through their country. After that, the Germans again tear through their country. You know, after a while, you see why they're so paranoid, because there's so many people that are actually going after them.
Yeah, well, also you have a lot of people who are, you know, freaked out about the Soviets too, and like, you know, it's just mutual fear that's driving a lot of this. I mean, we in America, 1919, like I have an episode that's literally just 1919, the craziest year in American history, and like so much worse than the McCarthy era, and yet it's all over in a year. 1920 rolls along and there's hardly anything happening. But
a return to normalcy.
Yeah, credit Warren G for that. He's a horrible president.
He's better than Wilson.
I thought you meant I was thinking of the rapper then.
Warren G. Harding.
Plus, you gotta admit, them ladies loved him. He's the first lady.
I always find
president.
it fascinating. It's fascinating to see the standards of like quote handsomeness and beauty like over the centuries and decades. Because then you look at it and it's like, wait, really? I don't know. I mean, good for him, I guess, if it works.
But back to the predictions thing. What about what people were predicting after World War I? So exactly 100 years ago, I mean, nobody would have foreseen World War II, right? So what do you think was going through the minds of everybody, like the world's leaders, when they're like, okay, this was the war to end all wars, guys. All right, it's over. I mean, sure, we've got that Spanish flu thing to worry about still, but other than that, hey.
We had that, we spoke of already, I don't know if you were already here, but we spoke of Marshal Foch and his prediction that like the Treaty of Versailles was just a holdover for 20 years. And it was pretty much spot on.
Dead on.
Good job, Marshall.
Well, that was his rank, not his name.
Oh, well,
it's like von Bismarck said that the world, the next European conflict was going to be in 20 years from some damned thing in the Balkans, and he was spot on.
Yeah.
There's always going to be.
He actually had like a date with that one too. He was like, 25 years from now, some damn thing, damn fool thing will happen in the Balkans. He said damn fool thing. And sure enough, it was like he was off by like a year and a half.
He's the master diplomat for a reason.
Yeah, but most people were not him. So you're always going to have example. Like,
whoa,
it's like
mind blowing.
No, yeah, like think about that. I mean, you guys are bringing up these single people like that predicted it almost to the year. Oh, who cares? Like there's people that predicted the Great Depression before it happened, the Great Recession.
I thought I was Bismarck this entire time. This is depressing.
I'm sorry to break it to you.
Having a life crisis here.
But also, I mean, like those are every time we talk about these things, they're also made as offhanded comments, not as like, listen to me, 20 years from now, there will be another war. You gotta stop it.
He's probably got 50 other quotes where it's like 75 years from now, I'm telling you.
Well, it's like, have you ever read H.G. Wells' the War of Tomorrow or something like that? Basically, it was his like prediction piece for World War II. He even predicts like a world-ending weapon and all that kind of stuff. But then you actually read like, it's like every time somebody trots out like a Nostradamus quote, they're like, oh, but he predicted 9/11 because he said that 2 giants would fall. It's like, yeah, but the passage before that, he was talking about clouds will rain like purple acid.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
That was like a Jimi Hendrix Prince concert that just like caused the
I was just making that up. I have no idea.
I'm gonna say that did happen, man.
How did people get started quoting Nostradamus all the time? Like there must have been, plenty of other people with similar crazy prophecies. Wonder what made him catch on.
People with a lot of free time.
Yeah.
Maybe his book just survived and we don't have the hidden copies of Steve Stradamus or whatever.
Plus, like, I know he was like at the time, like he was like a really popular physician. It's like at least at the time in Europe, he had renownedness for at least being a physician. So maybe it's just kind of like, oh, I'm going to talk to you about this random thing while you're in the 1600s equivalent of a doctor's office or whatever. Or 1500s, not 1600s.
Puts his book of prophecies
no matter
in the
what.
living room.
Either way, you're going to be getting leeches and bloodletting.
Yes.
I mean,
Works every time.
It could also be just like how Columbus. Sorry to bring him up into this, but like Columbus tricked the Taino people about the eclipse. Like I will take away the moon. It's only because he knew like ahead of time because he had astrological records. And so it's like, well, maybe Nostradamus was just a smart guy who was really good at observing the way society had evolved.
Really observe anything. It's a bunch of phooey. If you read it, if you actually go and read it,
I've never read it.
Yeah,
I don't want to read it.
It's just like when you go to like some sort of soothsayer, like like a freaking crystal ball type or tarot card reading or whatever, and it seems like they're like, oh, they really got down and like knew that I had lost my son or something like that, and people in really distraught situations. But if you're good at it, you're good at saying vagaries in just the right way so that people read into those vagaries. rather than
Does
actual
somebody
things.
know someone named James? Anyone in this audience?
Yeah.
A cousin, a family member, a friend, I don't care anything. Anyone has to know someone
how
named
do you
James.
know?
Well, that's actually something that ties back into World War One, because after World War One, especially in the United States, but I believe also in Europe, after all the soldiers that didn't come home, people started really getting into seances and stuff like that to talk to the people they'd lost, and you see kind of a big boom in that, and that kind of becomes a big industry of.
Yeah, I
picking
actually
people and
talked
talking
about that
to-
in a recent episode. I was
Yeah.
talking about the fall of Unitarians, and they went deep into that. Spiritualism is the movement's name, and spiritualism was really popular in the U.S. right after the Civil War, and that
Mhm.
for obvious reasons. And like it got to the I just put together an episode on what's his name? Is the circus guy.
Barnum?
Oh,
Barnum, P.T. Barnum.
P.T. Barnum, yeah.
Yeah.
And he, even half a century before Houdini did it, he was going around and debunking people.
Yeah.
And it was you read some of these things, and he's going I have seen humbuggery before, and I have participated in humbuggery before, but this is the height of humbuggery.
Yeah.
That's not a phrase that's aged well.
I love it. Humbuggery is just there's a great comic because he ran for he was actually a politician himself. He did a lot.
P.T. Barnum?
Oh yeah.
Really?
He was a state congressman for a while. He ran for Congress. He got beat by his cousin, who became the longest running DNC chairman.
Ouch.
Yeah. And then and Barnum was a Republican when he was running, although he started off as a Democrat. Basically, the Civil War changed him. Became a hardcore abolitionist during the war. But he had a long political career. It just gets forgotten because everybody wants to get caught up in circus stuff. Anyways, he also, because he was so famous for humbuggery, one of those anti-campaign ads shows a comic of him as a humbug but with his face. I think it's on Wikipedia actually. So
Well, you had spiritualism, but you also had the lost generation who all of a sudden well, the heck with religion. What's the point? After all the death and destruction that they had witnessed and survived, why are we even here? Why are we not the ones that are the bodies out there? That I think that it is fascinating to look at the aftermath culturally of World War I, and especially we assume that the Allies won, so everything went back to normal within a couple of years, like you said, by 1920. But also there's just kind of this new perception. I think society became much more cynical, I think, and realistic after World War One. What was that?
Well, speaking of this, whilst we're talking about the culture of it, do any of you guys have any personal stories of family and stuff? I know I put this in the document that you know of anyone who fought in World War One or any connection to it from your guys' family.
Not World War One.
That I just missed him by a year, but he died in 1987. I was born in 88. But my uncle Lee fought in World War One and had been buried up to the head twice. And he apparently loved to screw with kids. Just be like, oh, you think you had a bad kid? Come here. you want to complain about this?
Yeah.
I have
God.
one. I don't know much about him though. I have a great aunt who's still around that has all his war record stuff. She lives very far away though, but I need to make an effort to get out there to her. But I know that he, like I said before, he was in the military before the U.S. joined. He was part of the group that chased Ponce Villa around Mexico. And then I know he got sent to France. And because of that, I would assume he saw a bit of fighting. Because a lot of American troops that got there too late. It was over. But him being one of the first ones there, I'm sure he did. But I don't know in what capacity or anything like that. He died a long time before I was born.
Anybody else?
That's pretty much the same as me. I know I had 4 great uncles, my granddad's brothers, that fought in World War One. They all survived the war. As to their capacity and what they did in the war, I don't know. I know some uncles and aunts know, and then I believe my great granddad in Serbia may have participated in Balkan War 1, 2, and 3. My family comes from where Serbia meets Bulgaria.
Ooh.
So I know, wildland. But
You have quite a confluence of flags behind you.
well, this is every flag that I own from the Entente. I don't have a France or a Belgium or an Italy. Sorry, guys, but I've got an America, a Britain, and a Serbia. But
Yeah, but well, I mean, they also signify you a bit.
yeah, well, that's why I've got them. Yeah. But yeah, that's as I know. One of my uncles was one of the like horrific people that suffered from shell shock after World War One, and he would not talk about the war, and it really affected him. He was a totally changed man, apparently. But as to what he did and what he saw, I don't know, unfortunately. But
You'll find that a lot with there's a saying in the military is the more you did, the less you did, the more you talk about it.
yeah,
and that definitely holds true.
yeah.
Have any of you read the book Johnny Got His Gun?
No.
I have
Nope.
not, but I've heard of it.
But I listened to the song once.
Yeah, everyone
Forced
knows
to-
the song. What the greatest metal song ever written? Asterisk, debatably. Because anytime you call a metal song the greatest metal song ever written, there's going to be 5 trillion people who are just going to say otherwise. But
You're gearing down for an argument then.
But Johnny Got His Gun. Obviously, it's a fiction, but it's about a guy named Johnny who goes off to war during World War One. He has a fiance, like he's about to get a business, like everything is great, but then he decides to take up the call to go to World War One. And on the very, very last day of the war, on Armistice Day before 11/11, a landmine essentially gets him, and he ends up losing his arms, his legs, his sight, his ability to speak, his hearing. Pretty much the only sense he has left is touch. So I guess he can feel the constant pain he's in.
Yeah,
And
they made
yeah.
a movie too.
Yes, they did. And he can think to himself. And that's it. And so he's trapped in a hospital, essentially stuck with just thinking to himself and feeling the bed that he is laying on. And he tries to find a way to communicate. And he ends up doing so by learning Morse code, by shaking what's left of his head up and down.
And he types out frickin' "please kill me."
Yeah, it gets pretty dark. It was a popular anti-war novel that also got made into a movie, which is pretty good, and Metallica made a song about it.
That's it. That when you were talking about that, I remembered the song. God, that music video when I was a kid, I hated it.
Yeah, the music
Freaked
video
me
has
out.
clips from the movie.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even know that was
Yeah,
from the movie.
from the
I
movie.
thought.
The movie is frickin' horrifying.
Oh yeah.
But I actually one of my I don't think I've ever reviewed a World War One movie on this channel, but like
Do it.
I love World War One movies. Like
Paths of Glory.
Yes.
Paths of Glory would be a good one.
Oh, we got a super chat. Aaron Kowalski says, "Isn't long stretches of peace the norm between major international conflicts? Reformation wars, then peace, French Revolution wars, followed by peace, and the World Wars, then peace. Aside from proxy wars."
Are you telling me that like history like has a tendency to like repeat itself?
Well, he's
What an
saying
interesting
that, he
idea.
thinks that long stretches of peace are the norm, where I would argue quite the opposite. Peace is hardly ever a thing. We talk about these long peaces, but then it's like, yeah, sure, there was peace in Europe, but where were the Europeans actually fighting?
Yeah.
And there really wasn't peace in Europe if you count Russia.
Oh yeah.
But I feel like there is sort of a trend where you can look at like some one or two major conflicts every like 100 years or so, you know, between the world wars, the Napoleonic wars, wars of religion, etc.
We're talking about the end of World War I, right? So is the interwar period, as it's called, actually an interwar period?
No.
Yeah, you could make
no.
I agree. You can make it. It sounds kind of controversial, but you can make a pretty good argument that it was just we got a little break here, and you know, then we'll be back after intermission. I mean,
because like right after the war, you had Russia, you had the wars of Turkey trying to beat back the Greeks, the Armenians, and the French. You had Japan attacking China back and forth multiple times in like 3 separate wars.
And other people weren't fighting just because they're going through the depression. Like they were like, we can't.
Yeah.
They would have been probably.
Well, yeah, I think. All right.
Captain Morgan's has kicked in.
I think you'll always have conflict in the world, but I think there is kind of a rise and fall somewhat, even though there's conflict around. I think the only really long peace you see is the actual long peace post-World War II. But even then, there are proxy wars and conflicts and stuff like that. It's just the general level of violence in the world since 1945 has had a downward trend.
Oh, definitely. But even the amount of wars since 1945 has had a general downward trend.
Right.
I mean, even for the U.S., which I don't think anybody would be willing to say that the U.S. has been particularly peaceful since 1945.
We've just been doing policing actions. That's not the same thing.
I mean, but it's one of those things that like, it's such a misconception that that there are periods of peace to the point that we think of ourselves right now as being in a period of peace. Like I was watching a TV show, I forgot what it's called. It's like Migration or something like that. It's a brand new show, and it's like these time travelers end up coming back because like some super race is wiping them out, and they figure out a way to travel back in time, and they're basically time refugees. But they refer to right now as the long peace, and I'm just going like, I fought in a war, so I don't think that's peace.
Right. And I mean, I don't think that, I mean, there's always going to be somebody fighting somebody. That's just how humans are, you know?
Yeah. But I mean, like, it's not just all over the world. I mean, like, people think that the U.S. is at peace right now.
Yeah.
Which is patently false.
Yes,
we're in what might be our longest war, depending on how you count it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's like, that is the perception, like, depending on how you count it, we have never had more than 5 years of peace. Period.
Well, that was the lesson from Vietnam, because Vietnam was kind of like the last war that they really showed every night on television that every American got to see.
Yep.
And like, I guess they did it a bit during the Persian Gulf War because they wanted to restore American confidence, but that war was super short.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much like after
anybody
the first
remember 2003?
A little bit, but then like after that, it just kind of simmered off.
Yeah.
It was like, oh yeah, we'll televise the parts that makes us look good and why we're getting in there. But then once it starts, maybe we should have left.
I mean,
We just stopped talking about it.
I think a mayor of a town here in Oregon who was a high-ranking military officer was just killed in Afghanistan. I can't remember his name now. And even here in Oregon, that barely even made the news. I think it only made the news because he had encouraged people to go and vote.
Utah.
Before he
Yeah.
Utah, sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Ogden, Utah, I think he was the mayor of, perhaps.
Wait,
And
he was the mayor and deployed?
he was, yeah, as far as I'm aware, yeah.
It's like he was mayor, and like he was also running for a seat, I think.
From Afghanistan. What?
Yeah,
no, like he was fighting in Afghanistan.
I think he was in the National Guard. I think he was the mayor of.
Yeah, but you'd think you'd relinquish your position if you're going over.
Well, whether he did that, I can't speak to that, but it's just to the point of how little this is covered in the news. That American officer had died, and it only made the news because he had happened to mention voting, which was in the news, if you see what I mean. You know,
Yeah.
it's,
Well, I mean, there's a long history of that. Like, a lot of our presidents, for instance, have not been considered veterans because they fought in some small war. Even Harrison, who, you know, Tippecanoe and Harrison too, like his campaign slogan.
Tyler too, yeah.
Or Tyler too.
Tippecanoe and Tyler too.
Oh, wasn't it Harrison that led that? Or
Yeah, that was Harrison's
Harrison.
slogan.
Yeah, Harrison was Tippecanoe.
yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Anyways, the like there were debates even then as to whether or not that counted as like a real war, and it's like
what war did he fight in? I don't know.
Tippecanoe, that's the Tecumseh War.
Tecumseh, yeah.
I've never heard of that
Specifically,
war before.
Tippecanoe wasn't really Tecumseh. Tecumseh was off on literally the other side of the territory, but the his brother, who was like a prophet, basically tried to lead a raid on an American settlement, and Harrison turned around and went like, bad idea, buddy.
One of the many Native American wars fought that don't get a whole lot of attention. Yeah, there's all these.
That's literally what I've been reading all day for the last that's what my term paper is going to be about this semester, is about how you know, Native American sovereignty is that tribal sovereignty, that's the word, is often discounted by historians, and they're subsumed within our national story, which is like quite the opposite of how it should be told.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I've mentioned settler colonialism a couple of times in here, and that's where I'm getting that. It's a lot of the reading about that is trying to reinforce this core idea that there is no such thing as peacetime, at least in American history.
Yeah, there were like at least like 100 separate Native American quote wars or conflicts or massacres, whatever. Just lump them all together. That like have their own Wikipedia page for one thing, but like the only ones that are ever taught about in schools are like maybe the Tippecanoe one and
Custer.
Yeah, Custer, and it's not a war, but they'll talk about the Trail of Tears, and then that's it.
Yeah,
that's all they'll usually talk about.
Well, it's difficult to talk about all of it. I mean, I get that, but when you have a you have, like, for instance, you have a book like this that's talking about empires, and you're trying to talk about American empire, and you limit it to the 20th century. It's just kind of like, there's this other part.
There was this whole other thing that happened. I don't know if you've heard of it.
We kind of started on the East Coast and ended up on the West. I don't know how that happened.
See, it sounds silly, but I think a large part of it is like we associate empire with like a literal imperial title.
Hey, we had an emperor. He's great, Emperor Norton.
Of course.
How can you forget Emperor Norton?
Yeah, but in all seriousness, though, I think that that's what people think of when they think of empire. Because, like the British Empire, they had the British monarch. France had a monarch a few times. Germany had a Kaiser. Russia had a Tsar.
But
China has the emperor.
Jefferson talked about an empire of liberty. Like,
yeah,
he constantly referred to that.
It's on the state capitol here in Oregon, describing the something like the glorious empire or something that America is.
Glorious empire.
It doesn't say glorious empire. Let me clarify that.
I just hear that
But
freaking
that's
"We Are Number One"
definitely-
song coming in.
That's definitely the vibe they were going for. Whether or not
I'm just waiting for like the next speech. Like they told me not to call us this, but I'm doing it. We're the American Empire. It's like, oh well, here we go.
Well, I mean, one of the papers that I read for this is referring to basically talks about the rise and fall of the use of the term empire to refer to ourselves as Americans. Americans referring to American empire, specifically politicians doing so, and that's actually not something that like went away in 1899. It rises and falls. You know, you have people talking about Bush being an emperor, and you know, you go all the way back to Andrew Jackson, and like the main thing that was like that he was called was Emperor
King
Andrew.
Andy.
Yeah, King Andy or whatever. They conjure up empire as this is bad, we need to stop this because we are doing empire.
That needs to be like an all-encompassing verb.
Doing empire.
It's like doing empire because empire.
By the way, I know it's been going
second,
for a
guys.
while. I'm going to stick around for
Yeah,
however long.
I
you guys
gotta
want to-
go.
But yeah, Matt needs to get going.
My
I'm gonna have to
smoke
jump
alarm's
pretty
going
soon,
off,
too.
so my dinner must be ready.
Oh crap! Yeah.
That might be important.
Yeah, it's chicken wings.
So I don't know if you guys want to stick around, but Matt has to go.
Yeah, I've got to go see what that alarm was as well. Everyone go check out my channel, Stefan Milo, if my house hasn't burned down.
Yes, check out Stephen.
Yeah, especially Stefan's the one that needs more people go to his channel, and it's great stuff. A lot of anthropological kind of stuff.
Yeah, I actually had 1914 subscribers at the start of this video. I was going to mention.
Hopefully, it's up
Oh,
to
really?
1918 now, right?
It's 1922. I'm already depressed.
It's like I want to boo that pun, but at the same time, I want to commend you for it.
That's how you know it's a good one.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's it. Okay. Well, thank you for having me, guys. It's been a pleasure.
and thank you, guys.
Another one for you, Johnny. And don't forget to go to Matt's channel, Mr. Beat. He's collaborated on this channel a number of times. Great stuff. Does like the Supreme Court briefs and like states compared. We'll probably do another one about state rivalries eventually.
Yeah, well, I'll talk to you about that later.
Right.
Yeah.
No, right now. All right, thanks, guys. Good talking with you.
And
See ya.
So, Johnny, I think we have another super chat for you.
Oh yeah, the coolest tank in history. Well, I guess I could do the Bob Semple thing with this. I'm not sure. They're probably talking about the Bob Semple tank, so I'll say that's the coolest tank in history. Basically, during World War II, the Japanese were getting, I think they were fighting in Papua New Guinea, and they're getting very close to Australia, and the New Zealanders began to get nervous, and they didn't have that much in the way of a military. They did have a military and everything like that, but they didn't have too many modern aspects to it, including tanks. So I think it was the New Zealand Minister of Defense or something like that. Bob Semple was kind of getting fed up that everyone was complaining about this and no one was doing anything about it. So he decided that he was going to make a tank for the New Zealand Defense Force. And he basically took a tractor and built a superstructure out of corrugated steel on it and added a turret on, put like 6 machine guns on it or something, and called that the New Zealand Defense Tank. And it is hilarious. Somebody tweeted a meme at me the other day of a picture of the Bob Semple. If you haven't seen it, you should look it up because it's it's so funny. But it was like when you've heard about the trend but not seen it and still want to hop on, because it's just this really tall box on a tractor superstructure that
It looks like it's made out of wood, to be
yeah,
honest.
basically. But like it had all kinds of mechanical problems because it was, like I said, it was just a tractor, so like it couldn't change gears without coming to a halt. To where when it was on parade, the soldiers driving it were told to not shift gears and just stay at one pace, because if they saw its weaknesses, the people of Australia might lose faith in it or something like that. But yeah, it never, obviously never saw action. New Zealand was never invaded. But I've heard that Bob Semple himself was quite a colorful character. And when people attacked his design, he would basically say something along the lines of, well, if you think you can do a better job, go for it, in a very defensive manner.
I mean, when it comes to the coolest tank, I'm always going to have to go with the Abrams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I have no bias whatsoever when it comes to choosing a particular tank. None whatsoever. I have no experience with this thing.
I will say, as a person who doesn't know that much about like things like firepower, weight, and like all these things that what makes a good tank a good tank.
22 millimeter smooth bore, freaking, you can fire heat.
Yeah, like the
canister. I can do it.
if we're talking
tons.
about just looks, I'd say my favorite tank is actually a tank that they only built one model of. And they never used it for two reasons. One, it was too heavy, and two, it was built by Japan, and so they never ended up having much of a reason to use it later on. But it's called the Type 87 Chi-I, like CHI-I. And like the look of the tank is just different, and so I like it. And that's all I'm basing this off
It's a
of.
lot like a T-34. Or 32, 34 or 32, I don't remember which. That's like my favorite World War II tank too. the Russian one that they just could crank out. It was basically the Russian version of a Sherman.
What was the name of it you said again? Because I'm just finding Chihaz.
The
Type 87 CHI-I medium tank.
87. I was looking up 97. Oh yeah, that was their that was the first thing they built.
Yeah. But it was just too heavy.
Yeah, they basically got told, yeah, I guess you can build a tank, but we don't like this. Go try again. And then they ended up with the Type 89.
I find Japanese tanks interesting just because they barely use them.
Yeah, and I have a real soft spot for Japanese tanks because they're so like the development and the tank arm of the army was trying its best to do what they could, but they were just given so little resources. They were not really allowed to experiment much with doctrine or anything like that. And so they're basically torpedoed by their own high command, and then they get this really bad rap that I don't think they would deserve from their performance.
Because that was the main battle.
The stream has been officially demonetized. Yay!
Oh, really?
Oh.
Freaking giving it to charity and everything, but screw that.
We shouldn't have talked about tanks.
Yeah, ain't YouTube grand?
Now that's a World War I phrase we should just start using all the time. Ain't that grand?
Yeah.
Look, old sport, let's go to war. It'll be a grand old time.
Oh, there's a great song from that they actually used in a spoof play, and it's the title of the play. It's like, what a wonderful war or something like that.
Yeah, I used that for the outro song of my tank duel video from World War One. But yeah, oh, what a lovely war. That one.
Yeah,
I always think
why they call it
like
that's actually from World War One. Everybody just associates it with the play, but the play took it from World War One.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, can you
I was
imagine the guys
like
sitting around in like a trench singing that?
Like I'm imagining like a dark version of Louis Armstrong's "What a Wonderful World."
Oh no, you should look. It's the cheeriest thing you'll ever hear, and it was totally written to sell war bonds.
like, I see skies so gray, dead bodies too, so much artillery shells for me and you, and I think to myself,
Wow.
what a wonderful world.
Thatcher managed to make that rhyme.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's why they call it the Great War, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, it was so.
Yeah, the I love World War One songs because they all have that that either they're just straight up protest songs like I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier, like whew, that's like damn,
the CCR of the day.
I love CCR. That's my favorite
So
band.
do I. The helicopter song. Everyone loves the helicopter song.
So I was coming back from Bagram. I was coming back from leave, and I get in a Huey. For the first time, like an actual Huey. They had like civilian Hueys that like did transport and that. So the first time I actually got in a Huey, just UH-1, I have stuff playing. I'm sitting there all geared up and everything. We don't have the doors open, unfortunately, but it's still a Huey.
Yeah.
As it gets up, it goes straight from some other song straight to Fortunate Son.
Really?
And it was like, and I'm just sitting like, whoa.
Yeah,
We actually got shot at that time. They wouldn't let me shoot out the frickin' door. I was pissed.
I just find it interesting how like yeah, you can listen to whatever music you want, just like let's put on an anti-war song that's going to make us feel really bad about what we're doing.
Well, there's paratroopers still have their spoof of the crap, I'm forgetting.
Blood on the Risers.
Yes, Blood on the Risers. And like, the end of the song is talking about, it's like they picked him up and poured him from his boot. He ain't going to jump no more.
Yeah.
Like,
it's like, why would you play that?
Yeah, it's super dark.
It's like whenever like a person is like, oh, I love this love song, but it's actually a breakup song and they don't even realize it.
Have you ever seen there's a movie by John Wayne, well, not by John, with John Wayne, called She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. You ever hear that one? So
sounds familiar.
Yellow ribbons have become this thing of like, you'll see like, it means like bring the troops home. It's not anti-war. Actually, it's not meant to be anti-war at all. It's like come home with victory kind of thing, that guy. But it might actually be derived from like the yellow ribbon thing has always meant like bring the troops home, but like it actually was anti-war for a long time. And there's a song in the army called She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, which predates the movie, but it starts off with like she wore a yellow ribbon. She wore it in the springtime in the merry month of May. And when you asked her why the hell she wore it, she told it was for her man who was far, far away. And then like the end of the song is behind the door. Her daddy kept a shotgun. He kept it in the springtime in the merry month of May. And when you asked him why the hell he kept it for her man who was far, far away.
Man.
Like, and there's another part about her pushing a baby carriage and everything. So like, it is dark. Yeah. But like, that's my favorite cadence that I ever heard, and we sang it all the time.
Speaking of John Wayne, a movie that you need to review for your channel, because technically it's supposed to be a history movie. No, The Conqueror. I'm serious.
Just
you
to
have
be able to do that freaking Mongol-tage.
Yeah, like, and the best part is, you would barely have to put any effort into it, just because the things that are wrong with it are almost self-evident in the video. It's like, yes, I, Timuta, have unified the Mongols, and here is my wonderful Tartar bribe, who has a complexion of someone from California
Yeah.
that I will take upon my wife. And then like they play like Hollywood romantic music as he's literally kidnapping her and throwing her on a horse
Yeah.
to like drive away. And like the entire time, like John Wayne isn't even trying. Like he doesn't even do like a stereotypical accent that like you think he would. It just sounds like reading script to self voice the entire time in the movie. And so every time he gives like a, I am Genghis Khan, the unifier of the, it's so bad.
Well, I
You
mean,
have-
like, there's
Yeah.
like one of the things I actually like about the Death of Stalin is the fact that they didn't bother trying to do Russian accents.
Same.
Like, a lot of the time, especially when it comes to foreign accents that like we've become used to, like Russian ones, like to the point that like everyone can mock it. You know, if you're trying to mock like a Turkish accent, you're gonna fail pretty badly.
Mhm.
But like anybody can mock. Oh yes, we are heavy. We speak with heavy Russian accent. Like anybody can mock it, so we know what
Yeah.
it kind of sounds like. But even but that means that you also have to mock it right, and if you don't, everybody catches on, and like, yeah, it's half the time they can't do it right. So
Well,
why
and
bother?
especially with the like cast that it had of very familiar people to the average person. Like if they had done accents, it would have been like, that's not what they sound like.
Yeah.
I think it was a
well,
really
I mean,
good
like, there's a
choice.
lot of ones where, like, I mean, if it's like British doing American accents or Americans doing British, actually, it's not really as good as Americans doing British accents are really hit or miss sometimes too. But like, the Brits can do American accents pretty well a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And everybody can do a Southern accent.
Michael
Yo.
Palin as Molotov was perfect.
Which
One of my friends, What Is Moon, the chat, and someone else in a super chat pointed out that the set on Conqueror was actually radioactive.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. Like,
well, actually, so I actually know the board member. I know a few board members on the National Atomic Testing Museum. And you'll find that they actually kind of despise that whole thing. Here's the thing: he did die of cancer, but what kind of cancer? Like, freaking John Wayne. He did die of cancer, but what kind of cancer?
I don't know.
Lung cancer.
Oh, yeah.
He smoked like a pack a day. I wonder what killed him.
well, hey, that's more talking points for your video.
I guess.
But it is a thing where it's like at least 2/3 of the crew like got cancer of some kind within like a
Yeah.
certain like
Well,
5 years of the movie.
They were downwind from one of the more leaky tests, and but there's a lot of contention with downwinders because a lot of it is not just like you know, well, you got cancer and you were downwind. It's like, yeah, but there is a certain amount of cancer to be expected. And we're talking small enough numbers of people that it doesn't make a good sample size. So there's actually a lot of contention there, and not just like, you know, the government trying to, you know, we don't need to pay anything to those guys. Screw them. There's actually some legitimate contention as to, you know, scientifically whether or not they did get irradiated.
I hate to butt in here, but I've got to run, so I will see you all later. But thanks so much for having me here.
Yeah, have a good night.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, we've been on for almost 3 hours. So,
Yeah.
want to do like one more question and call it good?
Bring it.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see here. Let's do something World War I related though. Specific. Well, is there something in the document we didn't actually cover?
I haven't been looking at that
How
that
have
entire time.
perceptions of World War I changed?
The perceptions?
Yeah.
Well, we don't see it as the war to end all wars now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, there still was, like, even though everybody kind of, like, was shell shocked, or I mean, not literally, like, but I mean, like, figuratively, everybody was shocked from the war, like how bloody it turned out to be. And by the way, the War to Unroll Wars, that's a quote of Wilson. So,
Oh, really?
yep, good job, guy.
I think that a lot of the veterans have been pushed into the Lost Generation narrative more broadly than should be, because after the war, you see a lot of different soldiers' memoirs come out, and there's a huge spectrum of what people thought, how they felt about it, all that. And I think it's just the simple fact that the bigger books, the more popular books, All Quiet on the Western Front and stuff like that, had that narrative. And so when
Yeah,
the
well,
world was
Quiet on the
digested-
Western Front doesn't come out until like 30 or something like that.
Right, but still, by the within the next couple of years, you start seeing those books come out, and that's kind of the narrative that's put forward. And I think everybody's kind of generalized into that a bit more than is.
Yeah,
real.
well, especially like look at what I just talked about this in a video. The something Legion, American Legion.
Yeah.
The American Legion was formed because of World War One, and then when it would do its marches and that, there's ticker tape parades and that, and they're not just doing that for when troops are coming home. They're literally doing it, November 11th, 1919, November 11th, 1920, November, like the tradition of Veterans Day is started with veterans celebrating their service.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously there were people who were not so down and out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they're literally marching in the streets to celebrate it. So we have to, it's one of those ones where it's also kind of survivor bias, because we value it as historians. We value like text, right? We read nonstop, but you also have to think about action, and especially like a lot of these people aren't writing memoirs. A lot of these people aren't, and there's also this kind of like, who can write the most provocative memoir? And if you're trying to write provocatively, of course it's going to sound horrible. So once again, it could just be survivor bias that we call it the Lost Generation.
Mm-hmm. I also think that the Allied High Command and just kind of commanders in general have taken a big hit and been called stupid and ignorant, not knowing what they're doing, when in reality it was a costly war and there were a lot of costly offensives, but in reality a lot of the British commanders and people like that had fairly sound battle plans. And there's kind of been a stereotype rising, the Blackadder kind of stereotype of like, oh, the officers are morons and the troops are just
Well,
sent
I
out
would
to
say
be killed
even
and
with
stuff.
what seem like solid plans, they're always going to be idiots anyways, because everybody's idiots.
Yeah. So I think it's the opposite. I just think that everyone was well prepared. And so when everyone is well prepared, that's why you get a stalemate. That's typically how stalemates happen.
Mm-hmm.
Nope. No plan withstands contact with the enemy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what is that, Wolfka? Or
I have no idea. I wouldn't be surprised if that was a German quote, but it's one of those ones that's just become a truism.
yeah.
There's a lot of things. That's another thing that's an interesting perception from the war, is that there's a lot of kind of like just truisms about war that really stem from World War One, and then have just kind of like seeped in so deeply. Like a lot of the anti-Vietnam stuff was just repeating anti-World War One stuff from decades prior. And they were using the same kind of language. They were using the same kind of protest tactics and that. And like burning draft cards, that's World War One. like
Yeah.
through and through. Like you can talk about the draft riots in the Civil War, but the draft riots were not. You didn't have an assigned card or anything. You just had a name, and so
You could
Like-
run away.
well, how they burned draft cards is that they burnt raffle machines. You know, the literal spinning things. They
Yeah.
burned those. But in World War One, there were like public exhibitions of people burning their draft cards and that, and then like actually going to jail. Unlike Vietnam, you know, like they had to face up to the consequences of their protest. It was
Yeah.
a much more meaningful protest. If you have to face the consequences of your actions, that's much more meaningful.
I would add two more trends that I've noticed in regards to World War One. The first one being that it seems like over time, the Middle Eastern front has lessened in significance. Because like when it starts out, it's like, oh, it's this huge, grand foreign front, Lawrence of Arabia, all this stuff. And then like by the time I'm in school, it's like, oh yeah, that kind of happened. And then like more and more, at least in my circles, I'm seeing this thing where it's like, it is a sideshow to a sideshow, like they originally said. Type thing, and it just seems like less and less people are talking about it.
I think that actually has more to do with the movie Lawrence of Arabia. Actually, you'd be surprised how much movies can have that kind of effect.
Yeah,
Where especially ones that are that successful.
yeah,
Like we think like if you talk about the Middle East in World War One, you instantly think of sand dunes, right, and camels and shit.
yeah. Well,
even
that wasn't
though-
the case.
Yeah, that like just straight up is false. Like,
Yeah,
no sand dunes anywhere. They're fighting over railroads, and they're fighting over railroads on rocky, on basically gravel.
Yeah.
That in the entire visual aesthetic of the movie, which is phenomenal, like one of the best looking movies of all time, is also just like there to look good rather than actually tell a story. And we even now think of it that way because that's how much of an effect that movie had. That's what we think of. You know,
Yeah.
you even hear like if you think of that kind of stuff. You end up. Hold on a second. There you go. Yeah, you end up being affected by the movie. So the movie itself has changed perceptions about World War One.
yeah. Overall, though, I just feel like that it's more sidelined in classes, and whether it's because of the movie or not, that's just something that I've noticed. Especially like when you'd think that since the way the Middle East was handled after World War One has debatably led up to all the problems in the Middle East today, you think it would be the opposite and that they would talk more about it, but they don't. And that leads to my second trend that I've noticed. The one thing from that front that they do talk about more and more is the further recognition of the Armenian genocide.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of those ones where I'm glad that there is more and more there is a monument in Sunset Park in Las Vegas. Well, it's technically Park County, but actually closer to Henderson than anywhere else in southern Nevada. That is to the only monument in the park is to the Armenians, the Armenian genocide, and it was sponsored by Kirk Kerkorian, who I think part of the reason why there has been such a resurgence in that was because of that movie, The Promise, which is a pretty good movie. There's a problem with it that is like, oh, why'd you do that? But it's fictionalized enough.
And of course, we have to give at least 25% of the credit of the resurgence of interest in the genocide to, of course, System of a Down.
Yeah,
the heroes
they actually
of metal music.
They're one because their song, I forgot the name of the song.
They have several.
There's one that's really famous for them specifically on the Armenian genocide. It is a song about the Armenian genocide.
Yeah, but they've helped raise awareness about it, like financially and through their music.
Well, Serge Tankian,
Serge Tankian.
that he actually wrote the soundtrack for The Promise. And
Interesting.
performs in a number of songs. So
Yeah.
like he they've been big in that, and I think it's a good thing because the I know at least one historian who has been banned from Turkey for bringing this stuff to light.
Yeah.
And this is long before System of Down was even around. We're talking early 90s, but she just got screwed, and that it was the way it was until now. This movie is actually raising awareness and bringing people to think about, like, hey, this whole genocide thing is not specific to Germany.
Yeah, because I think that's another reason why we're learning more about it. Because I don't know if this is real or if it's one of those like Google quotes that you see all the time. But there's that thing where like Hitler supposedly like got his ideas from the Armenian genocide, and he says, "Well, who talks about the Armenians?" You know, that thing. Like, I don't know if that's like one of those Google framed quotes that you see all the time that's fake, or if it's real. But I remember, like, at least when I was in high school, there was this connection of like part of Hitler's inspiration for the Holocaust was how Turkey handled the Armenian genocide and how they barely got any flack for it.
Well, I mean, even if
there
the
is
quote isn't
some
true, it's a good
actual
point.
there is some actual truth to
Yeah.
to how the Holocaust was conducted being learned from Turkey.
Like I knew there was a connection, but like
what's
the
his
quote
name?
specifically,
something
I'm
like
not sure.
Marshall Ribbentrop or something like that.
Marshall von Ribbentrop.
Yeah, like he was in Turkey observing it, took notes. We have these notes.
Yeah.
And it was basically, well, they tried drowning them. It wasn't that effective. Then they used mustard gas in closed spaces. That was actually pretty useful. And like that's an actual connection. Like,
Yeah.
because those notes were used. I don't know if it was Ribbentrop or anything along those lines, but I know it was a German official that's really famous and was involved in the Holocaust.
Yeah, because I know that like in the United States, we're kind of weird in that like some of our states and cities have recognized the Armenian genocide, but as a whole, our country hasn't.
Yeah, it's a like, in fact, there's a Wikipedia article on
Recognition.
Yeah, the recognition of it, and it shows the United States as like green or gray, like gray not recognizing it, green as completely recognizing it, and then there's like two countries that have this like light green, and that one of them is the United States, because it's something like 48 states. Yeah, you know, states have recognized it, but because we are an ally with Turkey, we can.
Yeah. It says Alabama and Mississippi are the only ones who haven't.
Why does that somehow make sense?
Because historical cynicism. Hence your name.
Mississippi is just. Ugh.
Sometimes I used to make this joke all the time, like whenever someone would say the South would rise again or something like that. But like, no, yeah. Like all of you move to Mississippi and Alabama, and we'll just let you keep it. It's like that would be wonderful.
There's I was at a conference a few weeks ago, and this really famous historian named Patty Limerick was there, and she had they were on a panel talking about monuments in the West. This was a Western history conference called WHA, and you know, they were talking about like settler monuments. For some reason, they never talked about John Brown. I wonder why. But then you know, there was like, for instance, there was a statue in San Francisco where it literally showed like a conquistador above, like, I am big, and then it's like literally like native from like the Great Plains looking kind of native, clearly not from California, on the ground doing the 2-finger like I surrender thing. They took it down a couple of years ago, so that's gone. But it was clear. But of course, they have to talk about Southern monuments and everything. And Patty Limerick, she said, we shouldn't take down the monuments. We should just put white flags in their hands. That's it. Okay, that's too deep or something.
I don't know. It's just
I don't. I'm actually kind of against taking down monuments. I feel like, you put it up, you freaking deal with it. Shove their face in it. But like I do like the idea of reinterpreting it.
I like the retort of like, well, let's build like a statue next to the statue of who that person would hate. like I can't. It wasn't Harriet Tubman, but like one of the statues, like that was definitely a white supremacist Confederate. Like they put a statue of like a famous black figure next to him.
Mm-hmm. I believe that was a university, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, something like that.
That was like Mo or Ole Miss.
I'd say like it depends, especially because most of them were built in like the 30s, 40s, and 50s in response to civil rights.
Yeah, no, I mean, I understand why they want to take them down. It's just, I like it.
It belongs in a museum.
I would love to say that, but being the son of a museum director,
you don't want the backbreaking labor of having to drag those in.
Yeah, that's it's not just direct those in. It's you have to preserve them and you have to maintain them and you have to put it in the museum. Why?
You know what? That's a wonderful solution. Make a law that says you can't maintain them anymore. That's a wonderful solution. We'll let nature destroy it.
That's what they've done on a lot of them, but like, they're built to last.
Don't focus on that. Maybe like we can hire someone to like throw acid on it or something.
There was a Confederate monument in Arizona. I don't remember if it was in Tucson or Phoenix or somewhere in southern Arizona, because northern Arizona, there's nothing there. But like, sorry, Flagstaff. But
or the Navajo.
Well, they're Navajo are an entity unto themselves. They are sovereign. But they had a Confederate monument. It ended up getting like firebombed or something like that. But for a while in there, they just promoted local art by having people paint it.
Beautiful.
Like that's great. That's a way to freaking deal with these things.
Do the thing they did to that one colonial statue where someone glued googly eyes to like where the eyes are. And like they did this, I think it was in Georgia, but like it was some colonial soldier and someone, we still don't know who it is, like glued googly eyes to where the actual eyes were. And like I saw the speech of like the mayor's town going, "We will find this googly-eyed vigilante." It's like that sort of talking. It just scores like all the photos in the statue of just him with like these giant googly eyes, making him look like he just saw something really horrifying on the ground in front of him. That's so great. It was it was a Nathaniel Green statue in Savannah, Georgia. And let's see, I'll post the link in the group chat in here just so you could, or heck, you could probably just search in Savannah, Georgia, Nathaniel Green statue. And you'll probably, and it's like screen share and you'll find it, but it's great. It's so great.
I gotta share this. Hold on. Oh yeah, that's great.
It's so
he's got this face of like, what the hell?
Exactly. Yeah,
that is glorious.
and like the title of like the Washington Post article, it has like a small quotation in it where it's like, "Who did this?" with like a question mark, exclamation mark type thing.
Like one of those Facebook freaking things where it's not
Well,
even
like
where
the
they're just
city of
taking your content.
like the city of Savannah's government posted that as a status on its Facebook page. Who did this? Posting. And
they must realize that that's actually like normally considered a good thing.
I know, and like what it's like, it may look funny, but harming our historic monuments and public property is no laughing matter, city officials wrote. In fact, it's a crime. But like
it's the best kind of crime.
Oh, exactly.
It's civil disobedience. Like,
and I
take
still
that guy
don't
to jail.
think they found out.
Take that guy to jail, fine him for it, and just see what happens. Because they find him, or he comes forward and frickin' actually deals with, like his crime. They find him like $1,500, like the maximum penalty or whatever.
Actually, they talked about arresting him for trespassing.
Wait, you have to spend a night in jail?
I don't know. But still, I just like how they haven't even found him yet. They're like, we are examining the footage thoroughly. We will find this man. Still haven't done it.
Yeah, well, I think some of that might be security theater, it's like, well, we got to prevent this from happening again. But
that's what makes it so funny, though. They're taking it too seriously. It's like not the Streisand effect, but it's similar to that, and where it's like, no, we need to take this as seriously as possible, and it ends up just making it more funny.
Well, it's like in the whole Lee statue thing. If it weren't for Charlottesville, do you think that people would even care that much? Like,
that's an interesting question, because like I know that like the statue was already voted to be taken down.
Yeah.
Before the riots happened. So that proves that there were initiatives in some places.
There's a reason why the protest was created. Like, I mean, the whole Unite the Right rally was
because they lost the vote.
Yeah, because they were campaigning against democracy. So
yeah,
but
there's some people.
My allegiance is to the general.
There's some people in chat saying that a good compromise would be to put a statue of Sherman in the middle of Atlanta for all the Southern statues. I could get behind that.
Well, see, the saddest thing about the World War I generation dying off is that less and less are there people who will get a heart attack if you just whisper the name Sherman next to their ears.
I've got a good way to reinterpret freaking Confederate memorials and that. Bend railroad ties around them.
Beautiful.
That's you don't have to put Sherman there, but he's been there.
We could call them sore loser monuments.
Sore loser monuments.
Because like I know that's like such like a reductionist way of handling history, but if you really think about it, everything from those monuments to the KKK to all that stuff is literally them being sore losers.
Yeah.
It's overly simplified, but essentially that's what they're doing.
Yep. That's why I like Limerick's whole idea of putting white flags in their hands.
Yeah.
It's like, if only you could make that out of stone,
Wait, there's a statue of Sherman in Atlanta? No, there's not.
No way. I mean, I could see it on like somebody's front lawn or something like that, but like,
yeah,
that's like how Nathan Bedford Forrest still has like statues.
Yeah.
But like, no way, like as a city's monument.
Yeah, there's still too much leftover hurt from that. Just like Vicksburg didn't celebrate July 4th again until like the 1980s or whatever.
Oh, I thought I typed in the thing and I thought for a second there. No, it's in Washington D.C. But
maybe the fear of Sherman at this point's genetic. Wouldn't that be great? It just passes down through the genes, because like there's that theory that like everything that like you're afraid of is like a survival thing that got passed down through your genes,
Yeah.
and somehow just in like the 4 generations since then, or however many it's been, just I don't know why, but the word Sherman just startles me. Yeah, my grandpappy couldn't drive a tank because it was called a Sherman.
I saw a meme once. It was Roosevelt and Stalin sitting next to each other, and Roosevelt's like leaning over to Stalin, and it's like, "You're gonna love this. We named the tanks after the guy who burned Atlanta." And then the next frame is just like Stalin laughing.
Although something hilarious is that like a lot of these talks about like the people often like to talk about like, oh well, Germany doesn't have any Nazi monuments. It's like, well, actually yes they do, so you're lying, but it's not comparable. And also there's a long history of the US actually glorifying Confederate generals with tanks.
Yeah, the Stuart,
The
there's
Lee.
more. Yeah, the Lee. Yeah, duh.
Dude, if that was like if you ever do something on the Lee, Johnny, if you do something on the Lee, that's what you have to make every gunshot sound like.
just have an array,
archive footage.
have an array of Lee tanks, and just almost like a conductor, just like, all right, we've rehearsed this. When I point to your tank, you fire, and just like points it to where like all of the like 12 tanks firing just makes that jingle.
Oh
Boom,
man.
boom, 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 pow.
Or I mean that's how you could start the episode, is that you just hear this distant and then like as it comes into frame it does that like super volume thing that everybody likes to do.
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah.
the bass thing, yeah.
And so that's when you actually see it come in.
Yeah.
We got an episode.
No, the Lee just cracks me up. Like I had it in the second Meme Tanks episode, but it cracks me up because it was a stopgap, because I don't think we had the tooling to make the Sherman turrets on a mass scale or something like that. But Britain was like, we need tanks. And so very clear to a country that hasn't really done a lot with tank development. They're like, okay, so we'll make it really tall, and we'll put a gun in the hull, and it needs a turret because it's a tank, and then let's cram 7 guys into it. And it's like they just check every box for tank without really like thinking through like good or bad or anything. I mean, it didn't perform horribly, but it's just so like it's so obviously thrown together.
Yeah, because you did one specifically on the Grant side of things, right?
Well, kind of for both. I talked about the difference between the two, that one's the British and one's the American.
Well, you missed an opportunity for a good meme.
Yeah, I did. I might make that independently, because that'd be great.
Now you have to thank EmperorTigerstar.
Wait, what?
You're the one who came up with it.
Yeah.
Oh no, like I lost connection for like 10 seconds.
Oh, we've just been joking about the tank.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And that's another thing that I can just go on and on about tanks. I love. We had these things called we had this thing called a military petting zoo, that at Nellis Air Force Base, because the armory was just down the street from that, and we would go there every year just to like go climb around on all these like Russian things. It was so much fun. Like people. They had one of those like manually crank freaking like AA guns. And,
Oh yeah.
and so we'd get like 4 dudes, it's the double crank. So we'd get like 1 dude on each side of the crank, and it's 2-sided. So
Yeah.
we get 4 dudes like standing on the thing and just like trying to get
Turn
this
as
thing
fast as you
spinning.
can.
Yeah.
Turn it into a merry-go-round. Like that's professional training in the army.
Indeed.
Yeah.
As I think about it, it's the 100th anniversary of World War I. Well, it's not anymore, but that's over. but it's also the 75th anniversary of everything going on in World War II. So it's like the 75th anniversary of 1943.
Yeah, that's
So it's been the 75th anniversary for a while. So I don't know if we're gonna plan a stream for 2 years from now when it's 1945, 75th anniversary of the end of World War II.
Yeah.
I don't plan that far ahead.
But still, maybe the History Channel will actually show history again for one day.
Yeah.
Whenever
Do you guys
that
remember
comes.
the like? I guess it wasn't golden era of History Channel, but like back in the day when it was like the World War II channel, and they did have some pretty bad documentaries on there, but it was like World War II all the time.
Yeah,
World War II in color was my jam.
Yeah.
I still use that actually.
That's good
No,
stuff.
it's got some good footage.
And they did do like a World War I in color too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually, I mean, like, History Channel in the 90s was freaking phenomenal.
Yeah.
Like, in fact, one of my professors, Paul Hutton, was one of. So the History Channel started off as the Wild West Channel. So they just did documentaries about that. Hutton has actually written like three of them or something like that, and appears in any. He's one of those Western historians, you know. You've probably seen him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he kind of started going away from that whole from the History Channel and all of that, because they started moving towards just World War II all the time. Of course, it doesn't help that he also is a professor, so
Yeah.
But you know, that like, and that's burnout from like the early 2000s.
Yeah. Well, because I remember back then, like early 2000s, there was a lot of Civil War stuff there.
Oh yeah.
But I think the early nail in the coffin was like Modern Marvels wasn't a bad show, but it was heading in that direction. But that was kind of the first move, and then they slowly began moving to like all the like really
Don't
bad
bring that
reality
one
TV
up,
stuff.
please.
Yeah. Like my grandpa was a part of this thing called like the History Channel Club, and to where he essentially got free History Channel documentaries in the mail.
I remember that.
And so like he had this one documentary that I would watch all the time in elementary school. It was, you can find the whole thing on YouTube. It's called The Month That Saved America, April 1865.
Mhm.
And it's like narrated by Powers Booth. And
Yeah.
it's just all about April 1865 and the war. So, you know, you have that standard History Channel drama over dramatization of like, you know, Lincoln being shot, the surrender of Lee, will the honor and the intactness of the United States stay together? And, you know, things like that. And,
Come after the commercial break.
yeah.
Yeah, I remember when Ken Burns's thing was going around. That was like what, 2002?
Good stuff.
Like I was like in the,
You mean the war about World War II?
about
or-
this,
about the Civil War?
Yeah. And that one got to be really really popular and everything, but then it also just kind of like made everything go stale.
Yeah.
Like if you wanted to talk about like anything other than World War II, you always had to do it with this gravitas.
Yeah.
And it made like the rest of the History Channel just. I mean, really, I blame Modern Marvels more than anything else.
Still good, though. I love the Ken Burns stuff.
I really don't like Ken Burns.
The Vietnam War one was pretty good, too.
Haven't seen that one.
That one's really good. You can find all of his documentaries on Netflix. And I think my favorite documentary from him is he did a documentary over both the Roosevelts, just like through their entire life, and what limited interaction and yet large influence they had between each other.
The problem with Ken Burns is that he has this thing where he just goes like, ooh,
yeah, basic documentary stuff.
Ooh, like worse than any of us. Far worse.
Oh yeah.
And yet he makes millions of dollars.
To be fair, 1990s technology plus the Civil War didn't have video.
What?
Yeah.
I mean, like, but all they're doing is freaking going, whoop, 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 whoop. Like, that's not hard. Like, do something better.
Yeah,
You know?
just jump around from the thing.
Like,
Oh, someone in the chat was talking about mail call. Dude, I grew up on mail call. That was the shit.
yeah, Rip Arlie Ermy.
Yeah, that was so sad. I was legitimately so sad when I found out about that.
Yeah, that was a show worth its stuff. Although every time he started talking about anything that wasn't like that was older than 150 years, suddenly it just turned to crap.
Oh, really? I haven't watched in forever. I probably haven't watched since I've been an adult, but
Since it was all about weapons, of course he had to do the katana versus longsword thing.
oh, he did.
Yeah.
Did you ever meet him? I think I met him at an air show once.
I don't think
for
I have.
5 seconds.
Although I went to a lot of air shows, so I wouldn't be surprised if he was wandering around the same one. We went
Yeah.
to we always got tickets to Nellis, at Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas.
Hmm.
So got to see the Thunderbirds all the time.
Yeah,
VIP tickets too. It was great.
yeah. I saw the Blue Angels not too long ago. It was an air show in Indiana. That's because I don't know about the air shows around where you guys are, but there was a huge one in Mount Comfort,
Oh, we just
and then
we
there were a
just
couple.
lost the Emperor.
Oh, but there's a huge one in Mount Comfort, and then there were a couple other ones around that just from being near it were pretty big. And I forget what year it was, but like in the late 2000s, they all just died. But we'd go there every year to see
The one
them.
in Nellis, I believe, is still going on. But I
Yeah.
mean, it's an Air Force one, and the last one I attended, which I think was like 2011 or something like that, was still no, I think it was later. I think it was like 2013, and it was still really popular to the point of like the VIP area was crowded.
Yeah.
Like. And I mean, like the area outside of the VIP area, like right outside of it. They just have like a regular little area cordoned off. It's not like it's anything actually special. It's just free food.
Yeah. We still have the Dayton Air Show around here, I believe, but they used to be so huge. Like the Mount Comfort one, it'd have reenactors. The military would be out there doing like virtual reality stuff. It was a whole thing.
Yeah, they
just kind of all the ones in Indiana kind of all fell apart all at once.
hey.
All right, there.
Emperor's back.
There you are.
What happened there? It's just like suddenly he's gone. But yeah, we have. I don't think it's really changed in Nellis, but at the same time, that is the home of the Thunderbirds.
Yeah.
So there might.
How much
be...
did I miss?
Talking about air
We're
shows.
just talking about air shows.
Yeah, I just like dropped out mid sentence.
Yeah. But well, let's get it back on topic because it's actually getting pretty late. So
Finish it.
So we were talking about perceptions of World War I and that. So in terms of militarism, is a good place to end it. Is whether or not World War I was to me, I think of World War I as being this. In I think it's 1924, 1926, whenever literally the day that Pershing retired, there was a mass mobilization thing called Mobilization Day. They used the radio to do this big like public broadcast thing. It's basically the first public broadcast. And the this mobilization day was extremely controversial because everybody's like, we don't want to encourage war. Like there was like talk of literally jamming the radio by churches, like that,
Yeah.
And people like trying to say like, you will not put posters here. You will not have any kind of mobilization in this town. I don't care if it's mock. You will not do it. Like that was the attitude as late as 1926 or or 24. I'm misremembering. Hopefully somebody corrects me. But if that was the case, what's happened since then?
I feel like there's always been a battle between the pro-peace and the pro-war side. Like that's just one of the
Hawks and the doves.
that's one of the classic historical battles, or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, if it
But
would be an outright,
it's not just pro-war, pro-peace. It's more about how to achieve peace, right?
Yeah. But like if we're gonna like say that like the idea of glorifying military has magically gone away since World War I, that would be an outright lie for millions and millions and millions of obvious reasons, as well as 100 million case studies living in the country that we do. Like, rough estimate. And so I don't feel like that militarism, like at least the rhetoric of militarism, has changed as much as we'd like to hope it has.
I think the biggest change between, because if you're talking about mobilization and stuff like that, between after World War I and after World War II, I think by World War II, the idea was kind of like, all right, we've gotten into two of these things, not been on the footing that we wanted to be. Now, we should probably just keep it standing. You know, at this point, like, if something comes up, but also, I don't know how much of that you can blame on, okay, we just went through 2 world wars and had to throw a military together quickly, or how much of it was the Soviets are right there, we need to keep a standing force. You know, it's kind of hard to see
Think
which
about
one was
how much
more dominant.
like lower the military was, like just after the Gulf War. How much of a stand down there was then?
Mm-hmm. Which I mean is necessary after you have a big conflict. There's got to be some form of demobilization because you're not going to need as many people, but to keep kind of the idea of this larger standing force in case of something. The lesson seemed to be learned after World War II. But then again, after World War I, the idea was, well, we've put things in place so this won't happen again. So we won't need this big standing force, so put it away. I don't know. I think there's a lot of things that you could say caused the difference after World War II. But
Well, it's like
yeah.
an idea that we kept on hitting at the beginning of the stream is that you know, World War II was basically a sequel to World War One. It solidified the changes that were being made through World War One. You know, United Nations versus League of Nations. You know, cordon sanitaire versus policy of containment. You know, like these big world-changing changes, these things that changed the world, began in World War One, didn't really work until after World War Two. All right.
Yeah.
So I mean, is that the case with? So that's basically what we're saying with the military then. That it's like that this idea of like preparedness was solidified by World War II, kind of reinvigorating that attempt at preparedness after World War One.
Yeah, and I think you could attribute some of that to the shock of World War One. Like you said before, everybody was like, well, that was bad, we better not do that again. You know, and even if that was just lip service, that was the idea. But after World War II, it's kind of like, okay, maybe the world's a scarier place than we thought. We should keep the standing army. Plus, the world's a scarier place because here comes the Cold War. You know, things like that.
Yeah, it's complicated, and I think that's actually a pretty good place to call it good because we're pretty late.
Oh,
Doing
yeah.
this for 3 hours.
In general, it's complicated.
Yeah, that's just history.
Yes.
But how complicated?
Well, you see,
We need another 3 hours for that.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to remind everybody, we've steadily shed people talking on this, but be sure to go down to the description below and check out everybody's channel. Right here is Johnny from Potential History and Emperor from EmperorTigerstar. So be sure to go check out their channels. You guys want to say anything?
war sucks.
Yeah, I think that's a good. I agree.
Agreed. War
War.
sucks.
What is it good for? Military shareholders. Yeah.
So we'll end on that. War sucks.